Emily Carter pressed her back against the barn wall and did not make a sound. Not when her uncle's hand came down across her face. Not when she hit the dirt. Not when the dust filled her mouth and the pain filled her chest. She had learned a long time ago that making noise only made it worse. So she stayed quiet. She stayed still. And she waited for it to end. She did not know that someone was watching. She did not know that this time things were going to be different. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single part. And drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Summer of 1884. The road between Santa Fe and the cattle town of Red Valley stretched flat and endless under a sky that gave no shade and asked no questions. William Dawson had been riding since before dawn. His horse, a dun gelding named Patch, moved with the patience of an animal that had crossed this kind of country 100 times before. William moved the same way, quiet, unhurried. A man who had learned long ago that the land did not care how fast you rode it. He was 35 years old, and he looked it. Not old, but weathered. The kind of weathered that came not from years alone, but from the particular weight of years lived on the move. He wore a light linen shirt, faded to the color of old cream, a brown leather vest with a loose button he kept meaning to fix, and trail-worn boots that had seen 4 territories. The gun on his hip was there because it was practical, not because he was proud of it. He had a letter in his coat pocket, foreman position. Dawson Ranch, Red Valley, New Mexico Territory. Reasonable wage. Good cattle. Start when you arrive. It was signed by a man named Harold Mercer, the ranch attorney. William had never met Harold Mercer. He had never been to Red Valley. He had taken the job because it was available, and because he was tired of drifting, and because 35 felt like an age at which a man ought to have at least one place he recognized when he woke up in the morning. He was not expecting anything from this town. He was not expecting anything from anyone. That was why when he first heard the sound, he almost kept riding. It was nothing at first, a murmur beneath the wind. He caught it between one breath and the next, not a scream, not a shout, not the kind of sound that demands your attention. It was smaller than that. The sound of someone who had learned that bigger sounds got you hurt faster. William pulled Patch to a stop. He sat in the saddle for a moment and said nothing, just listened. The wind moved through the dry grass on both sides of the road. Patch's ear flicked forward. There was a ranch house set back from the road maybe 100 yards off. A working property, he could tell from the fencing, from the cattle visible in the far field, from the way the outbuildings were arranged with purpose rather than randomness. Somebody had built this spread to last. There was a woman in the dirt beside the barn. She was pushing herself upright with both hands pressed flat to the ground. Her dress, pale yellow, now dusty at the hem, was torn at the shoulder. Her dark hair had come loose from whatever it had been pinned into. She did not look up. She did not look toward the road. She just pushed herself up slowly and stood. William watched her for a long moment. Then he saw the man standing over her. He was perhaps 60 broad through the chest, with the particular set of a man who had never in his life been told no and had stopped expecting it. He was dressed well for a workday too well. The kind of man who wore his wealth on purpose. "You are an embarrassment," the man said. His voice carried easily across the yard. "You know that every time I bring a guest to this property, I pray to God you have enough sense to stay out of sight. And every time, Uncle Richard." The woman's voice was low, controlled. You were just nothing." He stepped toward her. "You were standing in the yard looking like what you are, and Wallace Fenton saw you from the porch. And now I have to explain to a man worth 3 times what this ranch is worth why my niece cannot manage to look like a respectable woman." She said nothing. She lifted her chin exactly 1 inch and said nothing. "You understand what is happening next week," he said. It was not a question. "You understand that Fenton is a serious man and that this arrangement is not optional." "I understand what you've decided," she said. "Good." I did not say I agreed. Richard Carter's expression changed. It went from contempt to something colder and more deliberate. He took another step toward her and lowered his voice, and William could not hear the rest of what he said, but he saw Emily Carter hold herself very still while the words landed, and he saw what those words did to her shoulders, to the line of her jaw, to the particular way she breathed through her nose when she was holding herself together by will alone. William dismounted. He tied Patch to the fence post at the road. He walked toward the yard. He did not run. There was no emergency requiring running, but he walked with purpose, and when Richard Carter finally noticed him coming through the gate, the older man turned with the automatic irritation of a person unaccustomed to interruption. "This is private property," Richard said. "Yes, sir." William touched the brim of his hat. "Apologies for the intrusion. Name's Dawson. William Dawson. I've got a letter here from Harold Mercer." He pulled it from his coat pocket and held it out. "I was told to report to the Dawson spread just north of Red Valley. Reckon I may have taken a wrong turn." It was a partial lie. He was not lost. But the lie bought him time in the yard, and time in the yard was what he needed. Richard Carter looked at the letter, looked at William, and then looked at Emily, a look that said, "This conversation is not finished." "Red Valley is 4 miles north," Richard said curtly. "Follow the main road. Don't cut across the fields. Mercer's place is the first gate on the left past the water tower." "Much obliged." William tucked the letter back into his pocket. Then he turned deliberately toward Emily Carter. She was watching him, not with relief, not with the soft eyes of a woman waiting to be saved. She was watching him with a kind of careful, evaluating attention, the way a person watches a stranger who has walked into a situation they do not fully understand and might yet make worse. He tipped his hat to her. "Ma'am?" She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. "Sir," she said, and William Dawson walked back through the gate, untied Patch, and continued north toward Red Valley. He told himself he would put it out of his mind. He did not put it out of his mind. Red Valley was exactly what the name suggested, a cattle town built in a valley between 2 dry ridges, dusty and functional, and alive with the particular business of people who worked the land. There was a main street with a general store, a livery stable, a saloon, a small church, a post office, and a building with a painted sign that read Red Valley Land and Trust in letters that had once been gold. There was a hotel that was cleaner than he expected. There was a barber shop with a striped pole that needed a fresh coat of paint. William registered at the hotel stabled. Patch ate a bowl of stew at the diner on the corner and then rode out to find Harold Mercer. Harold Mercer turned out to be a narrow-shouldered man in his 40s, with a quick, precise manner and the kind of handshake that tells you immediately whether a man is straight. His handshake was straight. "Dawson," he said. "Right on time. Come in." The foreman's position was real, and the terms were fair. The ranch, which bore the same name as William's coincidentally, was a mid-sized cattle operation that had suffered through 2 bad seasons and a foreman who had quit in the spring. What Mercer needed was a man who could manage the hands, oversee the cattle, and keep the operation stable through the summer. It was work William had done in 3 other territories. He said yes and signed the paper and shook Mercer's hand again. "One thing," Mercer said as he was folding the contract, "you passed the Carter property on your way in." William kept his expression neutral. "I may have." "Richard Carter," Mercer said, and his tone carried something careful in it, not fear exactly, but the particular caution of a man who has learned to choose his words around a subject. "He's a significant man in this valley, owns the largest ranch outside of town, has interests in the land trust as well. He and I are not enemies, but we are not friends." He looked at William steadily. "I tell you this so you understand the lay of the land. Dealings with Carter tend to become complicated." "Noted," William said. He did not mention the woman in the yard. The next morning, William arrived at the Dawson Ranch at first light and spent the day learning the operation. There were 12 hands on the payroll, a mixed crew reliable by the look of them, with the usual combination of young men who worked hard because they were new to the territory and older men who worked hard because they had nothing else. William introduced himself to each of them by name and asked them each one question. What's the biggest problem on this property right now? The answers were useful. By the end of the day, he had a working picture of what needed to change and in what order. He was eating supper at the long table in the cookhouse when one of the younger hands, a freckled boy named Cody, maybe 18, started talking about the Carter spread. Old Carter's in town most Fridays, Cody said to nobody in particular, to make deals at the land trust. Takes half a day, during which time his niece is left to manage the whole place herself. He shook his head. And she does too. Woman can run a cattle operation better than most men I've met. Keeps every record herself. Knows every head by number. He stabbed at his food. Not that Carter gives her any credit for it. Shut it, Cody, said one of the older men, a weathered hand named Dell. Not our business. I'm just saying what's true. Most trouble in this world starts with somebody saying what's true, Dell said flatly. William said nothing, but he listened. He saw her again on the third day. He had ridden out to check the eastern fence line, a stretch of property that ran adjacent to the Carter land, and he found her there on the Carter side of the fence, crouched beside a section of collapsed wire with a pair of pliers in her hand and a wooden post wedged under her arm. She was alone. She was fixing the fence herself. William pulled Patch up, and the sound of the hooves made her glance over her shoulder. For a moment, just a moment, her body tensed, the kind of reflex that lives in a person who has learned to be startled. Then she saw who it was. She turned back to the fence. Miss Carter, he said. Mr. Dawson, she said without looking at him. I know who you are. Cody Marsh talks too much. He does, William agreed. I don't need help with the fence. I wasn't offering. She glanced at him again, and this time there was something in her expression that was almost not quite amused. She turned a loop of wire around the post with practiced efficiency. Then what are you doing stopped there? Taking a rest, he said. Long morning. She said nothing to that. She finished the wire, tested the tension, stood up and pressed the post firmly into the ground with the heel of her boot. She was breathing a little hard from the work. Her dress was dusty. Her hands, when she pulled off her work gloves, were calloused across the palms. She looked at him directly. Emily Carter was not what the town seemed to think she was. He had heard a few things since arriving in Red Valley, the way you always heard things in small towns, if you simply stayed quiet and listened. That she was Richard Carter's niece. That she had come to the property 5 years ago at 19 after her parents died. That she had no money of her own, whatever she might inherit, was controlled by Richard until she married per the terms of her father's will. That she was, by general consensus, a difficult woman, peculiar, not what a woman ought to be. He looked at her and none of that made any sense. She was 24 years old with a face that was open and intelligent. Dark eyes that saw clearly and held what they saw, and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have taught themselves not to react until they have thought. She was a large woman, fuller figured than what fashion preferred, broader through the shoulders and hips than the narrow ideal, but she moved with an ease that had nothing apologetic in it. She moved like someone who understood exactly what her body was capable of and had made her peace with it. She was, William thought, one of the most self-possessed people he had encountered in 35 years of life. The town talks about me, she said. It was not a question. Some, he admitted. And what do they say? He considered her for a moment. They say you're stubborn. They're right. She pulled her gloves back on. They say anything else? They say you run that ranch better than most men would. Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile. Something quieter and more complicated than a smile. That's the most honest thing anyone in this valley has said about me in 5 years, she said. She picked up the pliers and the remaining wire and began walking back toward the Carter property. Good morning, Mr. Dawson. Miss Carter, he said. He watched her go. He rode back to the Dawson ranch with the particular feeling of a man who has just been reminded that the world contains more than he has been paying attention to. Friday came. Richard Carter rode into town. Emily was alone at the ranch. Cody Marsh mentioned this at breakfast with the easy casualness of a young man who does not understand why the information matters, and William spent the next 3 hours trying to decide whether to do something about it, and then finally admitted to himself that he had already decided and was just wasting time. He rode to the Carter spread at 10 in the morning. She was in the ranch office, a small building beside the main house, with a window that looked out over the eastern field. He knocked on the door frame. The door was already open. She looked up from a ledger that covered most of the desk. "Mr. Dawson," she said. "Miss Carter." He took his hat off. "I was checking the east fence again and thought I'd—" "You weren't checking the east fence," she said. He looked at her. "You came to check on me," she said. Her voice was matter-of-fact, not accusing. "Because Richard is gone and Cody talks too much and you're the kind of man who comes to check on things." She tilted her head slightly. "I'm not a thing that needs checking on." "No," he said. "You're not." He paused. "I came because I wanted to see if I could ask you something." She considered this. Then she set her pen down. "Ask. What happened to Fenton?" He kept his voice even. "The man your uncle mentioned." The temperature in the room changed. Not dramatically. She did not flinch. She did not look away. But something in her went carefully, deliberately still, the stillness of someone managing something painful with great precision. "Wallace Fenton is a rancher from Socorro," she said. "He's 57 years old. He's been widowed twice. He has land and money and connections to the territorial government, which makes him exactly the kind of man my uncle finds valuable." She picked her pen up again. "My uncle has decided that I am going to marry him." "And what have you decided?" William asked. She looked at him for a long moment. "I've decided," she said slowly, "that I would rather have nothing than live in a house with a man who looks at me the way Wallace Fenton looks at me." "How does he look at you?" "Like I'm a chair he's considering purchasing," she said. "Functional, adequate, not particularly attractive, but it will serve." She returned to her ledger. "I'm aware that's more honesty than you were looking for. You can close the door on your way out, Mr. Dawson." He did not leave. "How long," he said, "has your uncle been able to control your money?" She stopped writing. "Since my father died," she said. "My father was not a careful man when it came to legal documents. He trusted his brother." She said the last word with the flat precision of someone who has long since finished grieving the meaning it used to have. "The will states that my inheritance, the portion of this ranch that is rightfully mine, the income from the eastern fields, everything my father built, passes to me upon my marriage, or upon my 25th birthday." She looked up at him. "My birthday is in November." "It's July," William said. "Yes," she said. "It is." He understood then. He understood the urgency of Fenton, the timing of it, the particular pressure Richard Carter was applying. If she married before November, the inheritance transferred on marriage to her, but in the context of a marriage Richard had arranged with a man Richard controlled. If she waited, if she could hold out until November, she would receive her inheritance outright, and Richard Carter's leverage over her would end. 4 months. 4 months was what stood between Emily Carter and a life that belonged to her. "Is there anywhere you can go?" he asked. "Anyone who could—" "No," she said simply. "My mother's family is in Ohio. I haven't spoken to them in years. I have no money of my own. Richard controls the accounts. I have nowhere to go that he couldn't follow, and no resources to start over with, and no legal standing to challenge the will before November." She paused. I've looked at every angle of this Mr. Dawson. I am not unaware of my situation." He believed her, completely. She had the manner of someone who had mapped every corner of a room they were trapped in. "Then what do you need?" he asked. She looked at him with those clear, steady eyes. "I need 4 months," she said. "I need 4 months without Richard being able to force my hand. I need someone who can—" She stopped. She set the pen down again, and this time she did not pick it up. "This is not a conversation I should be having with a man I've known for 3 days." "Probably not," William agreed. Have it anyway. She studied him for a long moment. Then she said, I need someone who has enough standing in this community that my uncle cannot simply dismiss my position. Someone Richard respects, or at least has to account for. Someone who can, she searched for the word, complicate his plans, make it harder for him to act quickly. You're talking about someone who can run interference, William said. I'm talking about someone who can give me time, she said. Just time. That's all I'm asking for. Not rescue, not charity, time. He turned his hat in his hands. I took a foreman position, he said, 2 days ago, at the Dawson spread. I know. Mercer's a fair man. He's got standing in this community. He looked at her. And I've been in this valley 3 days, which means I don't owe Richard Carter anything, and I don't have any particular reason to be afraid of him. She was very still. I'm not saying I can solve this, he said carefully. I'm saying I'm here, for whatever that's worth. Emily Carter looked at him for a long time. Why? She asked. It was a simple question. It deserved a simple answer, and he gave her the most honest one he had. Because I rode past 3 days ago, he said, and I heard something I couldn't unhear, and I've been thinking about it ever since. And I don't know what that means exactly, but I know I can't go back to not having heard it. She was quiet. Outside, the summer wind moved across the fields and the cattle lowed somewhere in the distance, and the light through the office window fell across the ledger on her desk. All those careful numbers, all that record of a life she had built out of the pieces available to her. I don't trust easily, she said. I know. I've been given reasons not to. I know that too. If you're going to help me, she said, then you help me on my terms. You don't make decisions for me. You don't speak for me when I'm in the room. You don't assume you understand my situation better than I do. Agreed, he said. And if I tell you to stop, she said, you stop. Agreed. She was quiet for another moment. Then she picked up her pen. Come back tomorrow, she said. I'll tell you what I need. William put his hat back on. Yes, ma'am, he said. He walked out into the summer morning, and behind him he heard the scratch of her pen returning to the ledger, steady, precise, unhesitating. And he thought that woman has been carrying this alone for a long time. He thought not anymore. What he did not know, riding back across the eastern field, was that Richard Carter had not gone to town. Richard Carter had watched him from the upper window of the main house. He had watched William Dawson ride in. He had watched him knock on the office door. He had watched the conversation he could not hear through the closed window, and he had drawn his own conclusions about what had passed between a strange cowboy and his inconvenient niece. He was a man who had spent his life understanding that other people's plans were threats to his own. He had not gotten where he was by waiting to see what happened next. He picked up his hat from the hook beside the window. He had some calls to make. That evening at the Red Valley Saloon, 3 men who worked for Richard Carter sat at a corner table and spoke in low voices for approximately 45 minutes. William did not know about the meeting. But Dell, who drank at the saloon on Friday evenings, with the reliable frequency of a man who has earned his vices, heard enough. He came back to the bunkhouse and found William sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand. Boss, Dell said, which was the first time he had used the word. William looked at him. You've been over to Carter's property today, Dell said. I have. Richard Carter didn't go to town. Dell lowered himself onto the step. He let everybody think he did, but Pete Aldridge saw his horse still in the north paddock around noon. He looked out at the dark. And tonight, 3 of Carter's men, the ones he keeps for special purposes if you take my meaning, were at the saloon making a point of asking questions about you. William was quiet. What kind of questions? He asked. The kind that end with them deciding what kind of problem you are and how much of a problem you're worth making. William set the cold coffee down. They made any decisions? He asked. Not yet, Dell said. But they will. William nodded slowly. Dell, he said. Yeah. How do you feel about complicated situations? Dell was quiet for a long moment. "Depends," he said, "on whether the complication is worth it." William looked at him. "A young woman," he said, "on her own, 4 months from being able to claim her own inheritance. And a man with no interest in letting her get there." Dell stared out at the dark for a while. "Her father's property?" he asked. "Half of everything Richard Carter is standing on," William said. Dell made a sound that was not quite a word. "Yeah," he said finally. "I reckon I can manage complicated." He was back at the Carter property the next morning before 7. Emily met him at the gate herself, which told him she had been watching for him. She did not say so. She simply unlatched the gate and stepped back to let him through, and then walked toward the office without waiting for him to follow. He followed. The ledger was open again. Beside it this time was a separate sheet of paper covered in her precise, small handwriting. She had been up before dawn. He could tell from the set of her shoulders the particular kind of tiredness that lives in a person after a long night of thinking. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She remained standing. She picked up the sheet of paper. "My father's will," she said, "was written in 1876. He was not a lawyer. He trusted the man who drew it up, who happened to be a friend of Richard's." She set the paper down and met his eyes. "The will is legal. It is binding. I had a lawyer in Santa Fe review it 2 years ago. He confirmed there is no challenge I can make that would succeed before November." She paused. "What I can do and what I have been doing is document everything." "Document what?" "Everything." She opened the ledger and turned it so he could see it. "Every head of cattle, every acre of yield, every dollar of income from the eastern fields, the fields that are mine, under the terms of the will, which Richard has been folding into the general ranch accounts for 4 years. Every expense he has charged to the property that benefits only him." She closed the ledger. "I have 4 years of records showing exactly what he has taken from what is mine." William looked at her carefully. "And when November comes," she said, "I have evidence sufficient to demand a full accounting, and to recover what was taken with interest if I choose to pursue it legally." She sat down across from him. "But between now and November, I need to still be here. I need to still be standing. I need to not be married to Wallace Fenton, or removed from this property by some other means Richard has not yet employed." "What other means?" William asked. She looked at him steadily. 2 weeks ago, Richard told me that if I refused to cooperate regarding Fenton, he would have a doctor certify that I am mentally unfit to manage my own affairs." William was very still. "He can do that?" he asked. "In this territory," she said, "a man of Richard's standing with the right doctor and the right judge, he could." She said it without drama, the way a person states a fact they have had time to accept. "He hasn't done it yet because it would cause a spectacle, and Richard does not like spectacles. But it is available to him." William looked at her across the desk. This young woman with her careful records and her clear eyes and her 4 years of solitary documentation, and he felt something settle inside him with the particular weight of a decision being made. "Then we don't give him the privacy to move on it," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean spectacles," he said. "I mean people paying attention. I mean him knowing that whatever he does in front of witnesses." He leaned forward slightly. "You said you needed someone with standing. Someone he couldn't dismiss. A foreman from out of territory isn't as easy to threaten as a woman alone, and Mercer's name behind mine makes that even more complicated for him." He paused. "But it only works if we're visible. If it's clear that people know about your situation. If half the town is watching." Emily was quiet for a long moment. "Half the town," she said slowly, "currently believes that I am a difficult, oversized woman who cannot manage her own affairs and should be grateful that Richard Carter has provided for her these 5 years. "Half the town hasn't seen your ledger," William said. She looked at him. Then she laughed. It surprised both of them. He thought it surprised her most. It was a short sound, low and almost rusty, the laugh of someone who had not done it in a while. She pressed her lips together immediately afterward, but she could not entirely conceal the fact that it had happened. "Mr. Dawson," she said. "William," he said. "If we're going to cause a spectacle together, you might as well use my name." She considered him for a moment. "Emily," she said. "Emily." He nodded once. "Tell me about the Eastern Fields. Tell me everything you know about the income records from the last 4 years. I want to understand what we're working with." She reached for the ledger, and they spent the next 3 hours going through it together, page by page, line by line, while the summer morning advanced across the New Mexico sky, and the cattle moved in the far field, and somewhere in the main house, Richard Carter's horse stood in the paddock, because Richard Carter had never gone to town at all. William left at noon. He rode back toward the Dawson Ranch at a measured pace, thinking. He had not expected this. He had ridden into Red Valley looking for steady work and a place to belong, and he had found a woman with a ledger full of evidence and 4 months standing between her and everything her father had meant to leave her. He had not expected to care about it as much as he did. He stopped at the water tower at the edge of the main road and sat there for a while, letting Patch rest, letting the heat of the day settle around him. A wagon came up the road from town, 2 men on the bench, moving at a pace suggesting they were not in a hurry, but not dawdling either. As they drew even with him, one of them glanced over. A big man, broad across the shoulders with the particular expressionlessness of someone performing neutral. William recognized him. He had seen him at the saloon last night in the corner, at the table where Dell had said Richard's men were asking questions. The wagon rolled past without stopping. William watched it in the dust behind him. Then he turned Patch north and rode. Dell was at the fence line near the north paddock when William came back, and he looked up and read William's face with the ease of a man who had spent a lifetime reading situations. "They drove past the Carter property," he asked. "Water tower," William said. "Stopped just long enough to make sure I saw them." "Message," Dell said. "Message," William agreed. Dell leaned on the fence post. "You going to let it stop you?" William thought about a woman in a ranch office going through a ledger that documented 4 years of careful, patient, solitary work toward a life that was rightfully hers. "No," he said. Dell nodded once slowly with the expression of a man who has made his own decision and is comfortable with it. "Then I reckon," Dell said, "we'd better figure out who in this town is worth talking to." William dismounted. "I've got a few ideas," he said. William had 3 ideas, and he started with the simplest one. Harold Mercer. He found him the next morning at the Land Trust office on Main Street, before the building opened for the day, sitting on the bench outside, with a cup of coffee and a newspaper he wasn't reading. Mercer looked up when William came down the boardwalk, and something in his expression said he had been expecting this conversation or one like it. "Dawson," he said. "Mercer." William sat down on the other end of the bench. He did not waste time. "I need to talk to you about Emily Carter." Mercer was quiet for a moment. He set the newspaper down on his knee. "I was wondering when this would come up," he said. "How long have you known about her situation?" "Long enough," Mercer said. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "Her father and I were acquainted years back. Good man. Not a careful man, as I imagine you've heard, but good. When he died and Richard took control of the property, I had concerns. I looked into the will." He paused. "There is nothing I can do legally, Dawson. I've turned it over in my mind more times than I can count. The document is valid. Richard Carter holds legal authority over that inheritance until November." "I know," William said. "I'm not asking you to do something legal." Mercer looked at him. "I'm asking you to do something visible," William said. "I'm asking you to be seen with me when I go to that property. I'm asking you to let Richard Carter know that a man with your standing in this community is paying attention to what happens to Emily Carter between now and November." Mercer was quiet for a long time. "You understand," he said carefully, "that Richard Carter controls a significant portion of the commercial interests in this valley. The land trust 3 of the largest cattle contracts the water rights to the South Channel. He looked at William steadily. When I say dealings with Carter become complicated, I mean that men who have crossed him in this valley have found themselves without contracts, without water access, without the quiet cooperation that makes a business run. I understand, William said. And you're still asking? I'm still asking. Mercer looked out at the street for a long moment. A supply wagon rolled past. 2 women in bonnets walked by on the opposite side talking. The ordinary morning business of a town that did not yet know something was shifting inside it. She has documentation, William said. 4 years of it. Income records from the eastern fields. Every dollar Richard has taken that wasn't his to take. When November comes and that inheritance transfers to her, she'll have the basis for a legal action that could embarrass some very connected people. Mercer turned to look at him. How thorough is the documentation? Thorough enough that a lawyer in Santa Fe told her it was sufficient. Something moved behind Mercer's eyes. Not quite surprise, more like the feeling of a man who has suspected something for years and has just been handed the proof. She did that herself, Mercer said. Not quite a question. Herself, William confirmed. Over 4 years, alone. Without telling anyone because she had no one to tell. The silence between them lasted about 10 seconds. I'll come with you Friday, Mercer said. I have business near the Carter property that I have been meaning to attend to. Much obliged, William said. He stood up and touched his hat brim and walked back toward the livery. Behind him he heard Mercer pick up his newspaper again. But he did not hear the pages turn. Bored. The second idea was harder. There was a woman in Red Valley named Agnes Pruitt who ran the boarding house on the north end of Main Street and who had by Dell's accounting an opinion about everything and the social reach to make those opinions matter. She had lived in the valley for 22 years. She had outlasted 4 mayors, 2 fires, and 1 particularly bad winter that had driven half the population to Albuquerque. She was 70 years old, and she wore her age the way certain women wear authority, not as a burden, but as a credential. Dell had said, if you can get Agnes Pruitt on your side, half the town will follow inside a week. William went to the boarding house at 10 in the morning and asked if Mrs. Pruitt had a few minutes. She had him sit down in the front parlor and brought him coffee he didn't ask for, and then sat across from him with the posture of a woman who has heard every variety of story and knows already which kind this is. Emily Carter, she said before he had spoken a word. He looked at her. I've been watching that situation for 3 years, she said crisply, waiting for someone to do something useful about it. I had begun to suspect I would be waiting considerably longer. She looked him over. You're the new foreman at the Dawson spread. Yes, ma'am. You've been to the Carter property twice this week. Yes, ma'am. Richard Carter is not a man who forgets a slight, she said, or what he considers a threat to his interests. You're aware of that. I am. She picked up her coffee. What do you need from me? The directness of it almost caught him off guard. Almost. I need people to know about her situation, he said. Not the version Richard Carter has been telling. The real version. And what is the real version? A young woman, William said, who has been managing her father's property for 5 years, without credit, without pay, without any legal standing to claim what is rightfully hers, while the man who controls her inheritance pressures her to marry a man she does not choose before a deadline that would cost him everything. He paused. She has documentation of everything he's taken from her. 4 years of records. Agnes Pruitt looked at him over the rim of her coffee cup. 4 years, she said. 4 years. She set the cup down with a precise, deliberate sound. Richard Carter has been calling that girl difficult since the week she arrived. He has told anyone who would listen that she is willful, unmanageable, not suited to make her own decisions. She said it with a particular flatness that William had begun to recognize as controlled anger. I have never believed him. But belief and evidence are different things. She looked at him steadily. If the girl has documentation, she does. Then the story changes, Agnes said. Willful becomes principled. Difficult becomes determined. Unmanageable becomes— She paused, choosing the word. Accurate. Yes, ma'am, William said. Agnes Pruitt was quiet for a moment. Then she stood, which was the kind of movement that meant the conversation had reached its conclusion. There is a quilting circle that meets on Thursday evenings, she said. 12 women from the better families in this valley. I will see that Emily Carter's situation is properly understood by Thursday night. I'm grateful, William said. Don't be grateful, she said. Be careful. Richard Carter will notice the tide changing before it changes, and he will move faster than you expect. She looked at him very directly. Whatever you're planning, plan it faster. He rode to the Carter property that afternoon and told Emily what he had done. She listened without interrupting, which he was learning was her way. She listened completely first, and then she thought, and then she spoke. Agnes Pruitt, she said when he finished. Yes. She's never spoken to me directly, Emily said. I've seen her in town. She always looks at me with— She paused, searching for the word. Attention. Like she's watching something she expects to become important. She was, William said. She just needed a reason to act. Emily was quiet for a moment. She was standing at the office window, and she had been there since he arrived, as though she needed the wide view to think clearly. Richard is going to notice, she said. I know. He watches everything. He has people in town who tell him things. The saloon, the land trust office, the general store. She turned to look at him. By tomorrow morning, he's going to know you spoke to Mercer and Agnes Pruitt in the same day. I expect so, William said. She studied him. You don't seem concerned about that. I'm concerned, he said. I'm not stopped by it. He met her gaze. He's going to move on you eventually regardless. The question is whether he moves while people are watching or while nobody is. She held his gaze for a long moment. There's something I haven't told you, she said. He waited. She crossed to the desk and opened the bottom drawer and took out a folded piece of paper. She held it a moment before she handed it to him. He unfolded it. It was a letter, dated 6 days ago, from Wallace Fenton. It was on its surface a polite letter, formally worded, correctly spelled. A man expressing his intention to call on her the following Sunday at the Carter property with the purpose of discussing arrangements. The word arrangements appeared twice. The word consent did not appear at all. William read it through to the end. Richard gave me this, Emily said. He did not ask me whether I wished to receive it. He handed it to me and told me to be prepared to receive Fenton on Sunday and to conduct myself appropriately. Sunday was 4 days away. William folded the letter and handed it back. What did you tell him? I told him I would consider it, she said. Which is the only answer that doesn't result in immediate consequences. You're buying time, he said. I have been buying time for 4 years, she said. I am very good at it. She set the letter on the desk. But 4 days is not enough time for whatever you're trying to build. If Fenton arrives Sunday and Richard presents the situation as settled, and I refuse in front of Fenton— Richard moves fast, William said. He has already spoken to Dr. Calloway, she said quietly, about the certification. William went very still. You know this for certain. Marta told me, Emily said. Marta was the cook at the Carter property, a woman in her 50s who had been with the ranch since before Emily arrived, and who had, in the quiet way of people who are invisible to the powerful, spent 5 years paying attention. Calloway came to the property last week when I was working the south field. He and Richard were in the study for an hour. Marta heard enough to understand the shape of it. The room was quiet for a moment. How long has Marta known? William asked. About the certification 1 week. Emily's voice was level. About everything else longer than that. She has never said anything directly, but she leaves the office unlocked on the nights she knows I need to work late. She makes sure there is always coffee. She has on 3 separate occasions told me which horse is fastest in the north paddock. She looked at William. She's been helping me in the only way available to her. William thought about that for a moment. She's a witness, he said. Emily looked at him. She heard Calloway and Richard, he said. That's testimony. That's not just community awareness, that's a direct record of what Richard intends. He sat forward. Emily, if we could document the threat of the certification, not just the inheritance records, but evidence that Richard actively attempted to have you declared incompetent in order to control your property, that changes everything? That's not a family matter anymore. That's fraud. Emily was very still. Marta would need to be willing to say what she heard, she said slowly. Would she? The pause was long enough to be meaningful. I don't know, Emily said. She is 62 years old and she has no income outside this property. If she testifies against Richard and it goes wrong, she shook her head. I won't ask her to take that risk. Then I will, William said. She looked at him sharply. William, not to pressure her, he said quickly, just to ask. She makes her own decision. I'll tell her exactly what it means and exactly what the risks are, and she decides. He held Emily's gaze. She's been helping you quietly for 5 years. Maybe she's been waiting for someone to ask her to do it loudly. Emily was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the afternoon was going gold at the edges, the way New Mexico afternoons did in summer. Everything washing warm the cattle in the far field, moving slow and peaceful. The world looking for exactly this 1 hour, like a place where things resolved themselves in good order. She did not look at the field. She looked at him. Richard is going to tell people you're interfering in private family business, she said. Let him. He's going to say you have personal reasons for inserting yourself, that you're not a neutral party. She held his gaze without apology. That kind of talk spreads fast in a valley this size. I know, William said, and you're still here. He looked back at her steadily. I'm still here, he said. She pressed her lips together. Whatever was behind her eyes in that moment, she kept it carefully behind them. She reached for her pen. Come back tomorrow morning, she said. I'll have spoken to Marta by then. He stood, put his hat on. Emily, he said. She looked up. Lock the office tonight, he said. And don't answer the door after dark unless you know who it is. She looked at him for a moment. I've been locking the office since I was 21, she said. He nodded. I know, he said. Do it anyway. He did not sleep well that night. He lay in the bunkhouse listening to the sounds of a summer night in New Mexico, crickets, horses shifting in the stable, the occasional far-off sound of coyotes working the ridge, and he thought about Richard Carter sitting in his house 4 miles away, working through his options, the way a man like that worked through his options methodically without sentiment, with the particular patience of someone who has never in his life lacked resources. The certification was the fast move. It was the move that didn't require November. If a doctor certified Emily as unfit to manage her own affairs, control of her inheritance would remain with Richard beyond November, regardless of the will's terms. It would require a judge, but Richard Carter had a judge. Mercer had implied as much. I tell you this so you understand the lay of the land. William needed Marta's testimony. He needed it documented, witnessed, and in the hands of someone who couldn't be pressured by Richard Carter. That meant Mercer. That meant Agnes Pruitt. That meant a lawyer in Santa Fe who was far enough from Red Valley to stay independent. He needed to move faster than Richard expected. He was up before 4. Marta opened the kitchen door at 5:30 in the morning and found William Dawson standing on the step with his hat in his hand. She looked at him for a long moment without expression. She was a compact woman with silver-threaded hair and the kind of face that had processed a great deal of life without allowing it to distort her features into something other than what it had always been contained. Attentive, careful. Mr. Dawson, she said. Ma'am. He kept his voice low. I apologize for the hour. Miss Emily told me. I know what Miss Emily told you, Marta said. She told me last night. She held the door a moment looking at him, and he understood that what was happening was an assessment of whether he was who he appeared to be. He stood still and let her conduct it. Come in, she said. The kitchen was warm from the stove she had already started for the morning. She poured him coffee without asking, and sat down across from him at the work table and placed her own hands flat on the surface in the manner of someone prepared to be direct. "Tell me what you need me to do," she said. He told her. Clearly, carefully, without minimizing the risk. He told her what the documentation of her testimony could mean for Emily's position. He told her what it could mean for Marta herself if Richard Carter took it badly. He did not soften either side. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "I have worked in this kitchen for 11 years, she said. "I cooked for Richard Carter, and I cooked for his brother before him. I have watched what has happened to this property since his brother died. I have watched what has happened to Emily." She was quiet again. Last Tuesday, Richard Carter sat in his study with Dr. Calloway and explained that his niece showed signs of mental instability. He cited 3 incidents. One of them was the time she disagreed with him about a cattle sale in front of a buyer. One of them was the time she cried after he told her she would never find a man willing to look past her appearance. The third? She stopped. Her hands pressed harder against the table. The third was the time she locked the office door so he could not enter while she was working. The kitchen was very quiet. "I heard all 3, Marta said. "I can say what I heard. I can say it in front of a judge, a lawyer, or God himself, and I will not change a word." She looked at William levelly. "I have been waiting 3 years for someone to ask me." William looked at her. He thought of what Emily had said. "She's been helping me in the only way available to her." "There's risk," he said again. "There is more risk," Marta said in staying quiet. He reached into his coat pocket and took out the small notepad he carried for ranch business. He set it on the table with a pencil. "Then start from the beginning," he said. "Tell me everything you heard in your own words in the order you heard it. We'll write it down." She picked up the pencil. She started from the beginning. He was back at the Dawson Ranch by 8, with 2 pages of careful notes in Marta's handwriting signed at the bottom with her full name. Dell was waiting at the gate. "You look like a man who's been up since 3, Dell said. 4, William said. Dell fell into step beside him. Carter's men were in town again last night, the saloon, asking more pointed questions this time. "Like what?" "Like whether you're known to have associations with circuit lawyers, whether you've had prior dealings with territorial courts." Dell looked at him sidelong. "Like whether you're the kind of man who knows how to build a legal case." William was quiet for a moment. "He already knows what we're doing," he said. "Or he suspects it," Dell said, which with a man like Carter comes to the same thing. William stopped walking. Something had shifted in him, a small, very specific kind of clarity that came when a situation stopped being theoretical and became real. Richard Carter was not waiting. Richard Carter had been watching since the first day, and he was moving, and the question was no longer whether things would escalate, but how fast. "I need to get these notes to Mercer today," William said, "and I need to get word to Emily." "I can ride to Mercer," Dell said. "You go to the Carter property." William looked at him. "You're already in it," Dell said with the slight exasperation of a man who did not need gratitude acknowledged. "I went in it when I sat down on that porch and listened to you. Let me be useful." "All right," William said. He handed Dell the notes. "Mercer, tell him we need him to ride out tomorrow morning early. Tell him we need him to see the ledger himself." Dell tucked the notes inside his jacket and walked toward the stable. William turned and went back to his horse. He had barely cleared the north paddock gate when he saw the rider coming fast from the direction of the Carter property. Not a hand, not someone he recognized. A boy, maybe 14, on a brown mare, pushing her harder than a horse ought to be pushed in that heat. He pulled up when he saw William. "Mr. Dawson," he said breathless. "That's me. Marta sent me." The boy's face was flushed, and his eyes were wide with the look of someone carrying news they don't fully understand, but know is serious. "She says you need to come now. Mr. Carter came home this morning. He's got someone with him." "Who?" William asked. The boy swallowed. "She says it's Wallace Fenton," he said. He came 4 days early. William looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then he turned Patch toward the Carter property and rode. He did not know what he would find when he got there. He knew what he was afraid of finding. The Carter property was 4 miles at a hard ride, and Patch covered it in less than 15 minutes, which was faster than either of them had ever ridden that stretch of road. William was not a man who rode hard without reason. He had reason. 4 days early. The timing was not coincidence. Richard Carter had written that letter and handed it to Emily and told her Sunday, and then he had called Fenton to come Thursday, because 4 days was enough time for Emily to believe she had room to breathe, and not enough time for anyone helping her to build anything solid. It was the move of a man who had done this before, not this exactly, but the shape of it. The closing of exits before the other person realized the exits existed. He came through the gate at a controlled trot, and did not let himself look rushed, because looking rushed was the same as looking afraid, and afraid was the one thing he could not afford to look. There was a carriage in the yard, well kept, good horses, a driver sitting up top with the patient look of a man paid to wait. William dismounted, tied Patch to the post by the fence, and walked toward the main house. The front door opened before he reached it. Emily came out. She was wearing a blue dress he hadn't seen before. Not her work dress. Something better. Something that had the particular appearance of clothing put on quickly under instruction. Her hair was done up. She held herself with the precise stillness he had come to recognize as her controlled version of something very different underneath. She looked at him for exactly 1 second, with eyes that said, "Thank God." Then her face closed back into careful composure. "Mr. Dawson," she said at normal volume. "What a surprise." He understood immediately. They were being watched from inside the house. "Miss Carter." He touched his hat. "I was passing by on ranch business and thought I'd check on that fence section along your east boundary. Noticed some posts shifting again." He kept his voice easy and practical. "Wanted to let someone know before the cattle pressed on it." "That's very considerate," she said. "My uncle is inside. I'm sure he'd want to—" "Emily." Richard Carter's voice came from behind her, and then he was in the doorway, and behind him was a man William had not seen before. Wallace Fenton was perhaps 57, as Emily had said, and he was not an ugly man, which somehow made it worse. He was well-dressed and well-fed, with a neat silver beard and the polished surface of someone who had learned to present himself. He looked at Emily the way Emily had described, with the appraisal of a man considering a purchase, and then he looked at William, with the particular attention of a man calculating whether this new element required recalculation. "Dawson," Richard said. His voice was pleasant. The pleasantness was a specific kind, the pleasantness of a man who is not afraid of you and wants you to know it. "Didn't expect to see you out this way." "Fence business," William said simply. He looked past Richard to Fenton and nodded once. "Didn't mean to interrupt. I'll be on my way." "Not at all," Richard said, and William knew from the speed of it that Richard did not want him to leave without being seen to leave on Richard's terms. "Come in for a moment. We were just having coffee. This is Wallace Fenton, a friend and colleague. Fenton, this is Dawson, the new foreman at the Mercer spread down the road." "Dawson spread?" William said pleasantly. Richard's smile did not flicker. "Of course." Fenton extended his hand. "Fenton, good to meet you." "Likewise," William said. He shook the hand and looked the man in the eyes, and Fenton looked back with the confident gaze of someone who had not yet identified the shape of the problem he was standing inside. They went into the house. Emily moved to pour coffee at the sideboard, and William watched her hands, which were steady. He thought she has been doing this for 5 years, performing steadiness in rooms that required it. She was better at it than anyone he had ever met. Fenton settled into the chair across from the fireplace, with the comfortable ease of a man making himself at home in a place he had already decided he would own. "Carter tells me you've just arrived in the valley," Fenton said to William. "About a week ago," William said. "Good country," Fenton said. He glanced at Emily as she brought the coffee. "Good prospects for the right person." He did not say it to her. He said it about her to the room with the casual certainty of a man who does not consider the subject of the sentence to be a participant in the conversation. William took the coffee Emily offered. Their fingers did not touch. But she met his eyes for one fraction of a second, and what was in hers was a very specific, very contained rage. He gave her the smallest nod he could manage. She turned back to the sideboard. "You know," Richard said in the tone of a man making conversation, "Emily has been invaluable to this property. My brother raised her well. She's a capable woman." He said capable with the particular warmth of a man who has practiced saying it until it sounds like a compliment rather than a qualifier. "We're very glad she's had this time to develop her skills here before moving on to her own household." The phrase "moving on to her own household" landed in the room with all the weight Richard intended it to carry. Fenton smiled. Emily's back was to the room. William could not see her face. "When were you thinking," William said quite conversationally, "of taking the question to Miss Carter directly?" The room went quiet. Not dramatically. Just a specific pause, the kind that happens when something is said that nobody expected to be said. Fenton looked at him. Richard looked at him. The expression on Richard's face moved through surprise to something harder. "I beg your pardon," Fenton said. "The arrangement," William said with the same easy tone. "I assume Miss Carter will be asked her preference at some point in the discussion." He looked at Fenton with the particular mild steadiness of a man who is not performing aggression because aggression is not required. "That is the custom." Fenton's smile did not entirely disappear, but it reorganized itself into something less certain. "Naturally," he said. "Of course." "Of course," Richard said, and the two words had a blade in them directed entirely at William. Emily had turned around. She was looking at William with an expression he could not entirely read, complex, contained, and somewhere at the bottom of it, something that was not quite gratitude, because it was larger than that. "I appreciate that, Mr. Dawson," she said. Her voice was perfectly even. "That is in fact the custom." She looked at Fenton. "Mr. Fenton," she said, "it is a pleasure to meet you. My uncle speaks highly of you. I hope you will understand that a decision of this nature is not one I am prepared to make on short notice." She held his gaze with the clear, direct eyes that saw everything and gave nothing away that she did not choose to give. "I will need time to consider, as is appropriate." Fenton looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Richard. Richard's jaw was tight. "Of course," Fenton said again with less confidence than the first time. William set his coffee cup down and stood. "I appreciate the hospitality," he said to Richard. "I'll check that fence section and be out of your way." He looked at Emily. "Miss Carter, I'll send word if the posts need replacing." "Thank you, Mr. Dawson," she said. He walked out. He did not let himself breathe fully until he was through the gate. He stood beside Patch for a moment, with one hand on the horse's neck, thinking. He had bought her time in that room. 30 minutes, maybe an hour. Fenton had expected a settled matter and found something more complicated, and men like Fenton did not like complications. They preferred to withdraw and recalibrate rather than push through uncertainty. But Richard was not going to withdraw. Richard was going to recalibrate fast and move faster. He needed Mercer at that property tomorrow morning. He needed those notes from Marta in a lawyer's hands before the weekend. He untied Patch and swung up into the saddle and rode not back toward the Dawson Ranch, but south toward town, toward the telegraph office on the far end of Main Street, because there was a lawyer in Santa Fe whose name Emily had mentioned and William had remembered and now needed. He had a message to send. Jelly. The telegraph office was run by a thin young man named Porter, who had the particular distracted manner of someone accustomed to carrying other people's urgent business, and had long since stopped letting it make him nervous. William wrote the message on the form Porter slid across the counter. It was short. He gave the lawyer's name, the nature of the matter, the request for a response by tomorrow morning. Porter looked it over, looked at William, and sent it without comment. William was almost out the door when Porter said, "Mr. Dawson." He turned. Porter hesitated. Richard Carter has a standing arrangement with me, he said carefully. For copies of certain messages. He held William's gaze. I want you to know that arrangement does not apply to messages I consider confidential by nature, which that one is. William looked at him for a moment. I appreciate that, he said. Don't appreciate it out loud, Porter said, and turned back to his machine. William walked out into the afternoon sun and stood on the boardwalk for a moment. He thought about a woman in a blue dress standing in a room full of men discussing her future, holding herself with a steadiness that had taken 5 years of necessity to build, and buying herself 30 more minutes with the same precision she used on a ledger page. 4 years of records, 2 pages of Marta's testimony, 1 telegraph to Santa Fe, Harold Mercer for tomorrow morning, Agnes Pruitt, and 12 women by Thursday evening. It was not enough yet, but it was more than there had been a week ago. He turned and walked back toward his horse. He had work to do. Ciao. Richard Carter came to the Dawson property that evening, not with his men, alone. He rode up to the main house at dusk with the particular calm of a man who has calculated his next 10 moves and is comfortable with all of them. William was on the porch. He did not stand when Richard arrived. He waited. Richard dismounted and came to the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at him with an expression that had shed every trace of the afternoon's pleasantness. I want to understand something, Richard said. What exactly do you think you're doing? My job, William said. Ranch business. You know how it is. Don't do that, Richard said. His voice was quiet, and the quiet was the most dangerous thing in it. I've been in this valley for 20 years. I know every man who has ever thought he could complicate my affairs, and I know how each of those situations resolved. He looked at William steadily. You have been in this valley for 1 week. You don't know what you're walking into. I have a fair idea, William said. Then you know it ends badly for people who don't belong here. I'm starting to feel like I belong here, William said. Richard looked at him for a long moment. She's my niece, he said. She is family. Whatever you think you've seen or heard, the situation between Emily and myself is private family business. It is not the concern of an itinerant ranch hand who arrived 7 days ago. The word itinerant landed with precision. You have a job here. I'd suggest focusing on it. I plan to, William said. Richard waited for more. When there was no more, his jaw tightened slightly. There is nothing you can build in this valley that I cannot dismantle, he said. I want that understood clearly. William looked at him. Mr. Carter, he said, I hear you. He held the man's gaze without hostility and without yielding. I want you to hear me. I am not here to make an enemy of you. I am not here to dismantle anything. I am here to make sure that a young woman gets to November in one piece. He paused. That's all. Everything else is between you and whatever you reckon you can live with. The silence stretched between them for 10 full seconds. Richard Carter turned, mounted his horse, and rode back toward his property without another word. William watched him go. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the evening sky and thought, he's not done. He was right. He just did not know yet what form the next move would take. He would find out in the morning. The morning came fast and hard. William was already dressed when Dell knocked on the bunkhouse door at first light, and the look on Dell's face told him everything before he spoke a word. Rider from town, Dell said. Porter at the telegraph. He rode out himself, didn't send a boy. William was out the door before Dell finished the sentence. Porter was standing by the gate with his horse still lathered from the ride. He was a man who did not rattle easily. William had understood that much from the telegraph office, but he was rattled now. Last night, Porter said without preamble. After you left, Carter came in. Not his men, Carter himself. He wanted the log for the previous 48 hours. Did he get it? I told him the log was current only to yesterday noon, and the rest was still being transcribed. Porter held William's gaze. It was a lie. He knew it was a lie, but he couldn't prove it, so he took what I gave him and left." He paused. "He knows you sent a message. He doesn't know what it said or who received it, but he knows." William thought for 3 seconds. "How long do I have before he starts making his own moves?" "He already has," Porter said. "On his way out he stopped at Judge Heller's house. I have a man on that street. Heller's lamp was on until midnight." Judge Heller. That was the judge Mercer had not mentioned by name, but had implied. The judge Richard Carter had in his pocket. "Thank you," William said. "Don't thank me," Porter said in exactly the same tone he'd used the day before. He turned his horse. "Get ahead of whatever's coming." He rode back toward town. William stood in the early morning quiet for exactly 30 seconds, thinking through the shape of what was happening. Richard had gone to Heller. Heller could move quickly on a certification if Richard provided the documentation. The documentation was whatever Dr. Calloway had prepared after his visit to the Carter property the week before, which meant the question was not whether Richard was going to use it. The question was how soon. He went inside and found Dell standing at the stove with 2 cups of coffee. "How fast can you ride to Mercer?" William asked. "Faster than yesterday," Dell said, and handed him a cup. "Tell him not Friday. Tell him this morning. Tell him to bring whatever legal standing he's got and come ready to see a ledger." William took the coffee and drank it standing. "And tell him to stop at Agnes Pruitt's on his way." Dell set his own cup down. "That bad," he said. "Carter was at Judge Heller's house until midnight," William said. Dell was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his hat from the nail by the door. "I'll be at Mercer's inside 20 minutes, he said. He was out the door before William finished the coffee. William rode to the Carter property alone. He did not know what he would find. He knew what he hoped to find: Emily in the office. The ledger on the desk, Marta in the kitchen, and the house running the way it always ran. And he knew that hoping and finding were different things, and that Richard Carter had been awake until midnight with a judge, and that changed the nature of what this morning could become. He came through the gate at a walk, and kept it at a walk all the way to the house, because the appearance of calm was the only leverage available to him right now. Marta was in the kitchen doorway. Her face told him nothing. That was how he knew something was wrong. "Where is she?" he said. "Main house," Marta said. Her voice was low. "Richard got back from town an hour ago. He has the doctor with him." The words landed like a fist. "Calloway is here. Came with Richard. They went straight to the parlor. Emily—" She stopped. Emily walked in on her own. Richard told her there was something they needed to discuss. She didn't know who was in there. William was moving before Marta finished the sentence. He went through the kitchen, through the back corridor, and came into the hallway that led to the parlor. The parlor door was closed. He could hear voices through it. He stopped. He stood with his hand not quite on the door handle and listened, because walking into that room wrong was worse than not walking in at all. Richard's voice measured and paternal. "This isn't punishment, Emily. This is care. Dr. Calloway has expressed genuine concern. Dr. Calloway," Emily's voice said, "has visited this property once, for 1 hour, during which time he did not speak to me." A pause. The particular quality of stillness in her voice that William had come to recognize as her absolute limit. "He spoke to you. Your behavior has given us cause." "Name it," she said. Silence. "Name the behavior," she said. "Specifically, with dates." "Emily, you told me I was difficult. You told me I was willful. You've been telling me that for 5 years." Her voice had not risen. It was doing something more dangerous than rising. It was becoming more precise with every word. "But a judge will want specifics, Uncle Richard. A judge will want dates and incidents and witnesses. And I would very much like to hear what incidents and what witnesses you intend to present." Another silence. Longer. "We could handle this quietly," Richard said, "without anyone outside this room needing to know." "If you could handle it quietly," Emily said, "you would not have brought Dr. Calloway." William opened the door. All 3 of them turned. Richard Carter's expression moved through surprise to fury, to the controlled surface of fury, in the space of 2 seconds. Dr. Calloway, a soft-faced man in his 50s, with the look of someone who was deeply uncomfortable with where he found himself, turned toward William with something close to relief. Emily stood in the center of the room with her back straight, and her hands at her sides, and her eyes on William, with the particular quality of someone who has been holding a position alone and has just been joined. "Dawson," Richard said, "this is a private family matter." "Yes, sir," William said. He came into the room fully and closed the door behind him. He looked at Dr. Calloway. "Doctor, I understand you've come to conduct an evaluation." Calloway cleared his throat. "I've come at Mr. Carter's request." "Has Miss Carter consented to an evaluation?" William asked. Calloway looked at Richard. Richard's jaw was tight. "The question of consent," Richard said, "is part of what is being evaluated." "Is it?" William said. He looked at Calloway steadily. "In my experience, Doctor, a court-ordered evaluation requires a court order. Has that order been issued?" Calloway's eyes went to Richard again. "Not yet," Richard said. The words were even, but there was something beneath them that was not even. "This is a preliminary. Then there's nothing to evaluate," William said pleasantly. "Miss Carter, you are under no obligation to participate in a preliminary anything without legal representation present." He looked at her. "I've sent for Mercer. He'll be here within the hour." The room was very quiet. Richard Carter looked at William for a long moment, the look of a man recalculating something faster than he would like. "You have no standing here," Richard said. "No, sir," William agreed. "I'm just a man who showed up, but Mercer has standing, and the lawyer arriving from Santa Fe this afternoon has standing, and the 2 pages of witness testimony regarding your conversation with Dr. Calloway last Tuesday have standing." He kept his voice even and his eyes on Richard and let the silence do the rest. The color left Richard Carter's face. Not all of it, just enough. Dr. Calloway set his black bag down on the side table. "Richard," he said carefully, "perhaps we should—" "Don't," Richard said. Not to Calloway, to William, to the shape of what William had just put in the room. "You have no idea what you're doing." "I think I do," William said. Emily had not moved from the center of the room. She was looking at William with an expression that was doing something complicated, gratitude and pride, and a very specific kind of anger. The anger of a woman who had fought alone for a long time and was now watching someone fight beside her, and was not entirely sure how to hold both things at once. "Mr. Carter," she said. Richard looked at her. "I would like Dr. Calloway to leave," she said, "and I would like you to sit down, because I have some things to say to you, and I would prefer to say them now with Mr. Dawson present as a witness, rather than later in front of a judge." The silence lasted 5 seconds. Then Richard Carter sat down. "Case." She spoke for 11 minutes. William stood by the door and did not interrupt. This was what she had needed. Not rescue, not someone to speak for her, but one person in the room who could not be moved so that she could speak without watching every exit. She told Richard what she knew. All of it. The income from the eastern fields that he had absorbed into the general accounts. The cattle sales he had logged below market rate and pocketed the difference. The expenses he had charged to the property for his personal benefit. She did not raise her voice. She named figures and dates from memory, with the precision of someone who had been rehearsing this conversation for 4 years and had known exactly how it would go when she finally had the right audience for it. She told him about the lawyer in Santa Fe. She told him that Marta's testimony had been written down and witnessed and was no longer inside the property where it could be made to disappear. She told him that if he proceeded with either the Fenton arrangement or the certification, she would pursue a full legal accounting of everything he had taken from her father's estate, going back to the day her father died. She told him she would do it publicly in a territorial court with Harold Mercer standing beside her. She told him she did not want to. "I do not want a war with you," she said. I do not want to stand up in a courtroom and say these things out loud and have this family's name in every newspaper from here to Santa Fe. I do not want that." She held his gaze. "But I will if you make me. You should know that about me by now. When I say I will do something, I do it." Richard Carter was very still. He was a man who had spent 20 years in this valley and had never once been spoken to this way in his own house, by anyone, and certainly not by her. "You think," he said slowly, "that because this cowboy walked in here with a notepad and a lawyer's name, you have leverage." "I think," Emily said, "that I have had leverage for 4 years. I was simply waiting until I had a witness." Calloway, who had been attempting to become invisible in the corner, chose this moment to stand up. "I need to be going," he said. His voice was slightly uneven. "Richard, this I was not aware of the full circumstances. I don't think this is something I can—" He picked up his bag. "I need to be going." He went. The sound of the front door closing behind him was very loud in the quiet of the parlor. Richard Carter looked at the space where Calloway had been standing. Then he looked at Emily. Then he looked at William. "Get out of my house," he said. "Quiet. No performance in it anymore. Just a man at the end of something." "Emily," William said. She looked at him. "Come with me," he said. She held Richard's gaze for one more moment, long enough to be deliberate, not so long as to be cruel, and then she walked toward the door. She walked past William without stopping. He followed her out. They stood in the yard in the morning quiet. Marta appeared from the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee and handed them over without a word and went back inside, which was exactly right. Emily stood with the cup in both hands and did not say anything for a long time. William did not say anything either. Finally she said, "He's not finished." "No." William agreed. That was what just happened, was the beginning of something, not the end of it. She looked at the coffee in her hands. "He's going to go to Heller. Maybe he already has enough for Heller to move on." She looked up. "Can Mercer stop a judge?" "Mercer can slow one down," William said. "The lawyer from Santa Fe can complicate it further, and the documentation you have gives any reasonable judge cause to be careful about how fast he moves." He paused. "Richard needs Heller to move before November. If November comes and the inheritance transfers to you outright, none of this matters anymore. His leverage ends." 4 months, she said. It was the same thing she had said in the office the first day, but it sounded different now, not like a sentence, but like a distance she could see across. 3 months and 20 days, William said. She looked at him. "You counted," she said. "I counted," he said. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile, not quite something else, but something in the middle of both that was more honest than either. "William," she said. He looked at her. "What you did in there," she said, "walking in, standing there, saying what you said about the testimony." She paused. "That was not nothing." "No," he said. "It wasn't. I need you to understand something." She held his gaze steadily. "I am grateful, but I was going to hold that room with or without you. What you did was not save me. You gave me better ground to stand on." "I know the difference," he said. "I need you to keep knowing it," she said, "because what comes next is going to get harder, and when it gets harder, there will be a very natural tendency for you to want to step in front of me. And I need you to step beside me instead." He looked at her for a long moment. "Beside," he said. "Beside," she said. He nodded once. "Beside it is," he said. Mercer arrived 40 minutes later, with Agnes Pruitt in the seat beside him, which was not what William had asked for, and was exactly right. Agnes Pruitt climbed down from the wagon before it fully stopped, which is the kind of thing a 70-year-old woman does when she has decided the situation requires urgency. She looked at Emily. Emily looked at her. There was a long pause. "Well," Agnes said, "you look better than I expected given what I just heard on the ride over." "I had good ground to stand on," Emily said. Her eyes moved briefly to William. I managed. Agnes looked at Mercer. Mercer looked at William. William looked at nobody in particular. Right, Agnes said briskly. Let's go inside and figure out what happens next. They went inside. What happened next was 3 hours of conversation that covered every angle of the situation. The ledger, Marta's testimony, the telegraph to Santa Fe, the certification threat, Judge Heller Fenton, and the mathematics of 3 months and 20 days. Mercer was methodical. Agnes was blunt. Emily walked them through the documentation with the same precise calm she had used in the parlor, and William watched Mercer's expression move from concern through calculation to something approaching confidence. The certification route is not clean for him, Mercer said at the end of it. Not with this documentation, not with Marta's testimony, and certainly not with a Santa Fe lawyer involved. Heller would have to be very sure of the ground before he moved on it, and right now the ground is not sure. He looked at Emily. That doesn't mean he won't try, but it means he can't do it quickly. What about Fenton? Emily asked. Fenton is more complicated, Mercer said carefully. Fenton came voluntarily. He can choose to withdraw if the situation becomes unattractive to him. The question is whether Richard can keep him committed. Richard will tell him this is a temporary complication, Agnes said. That the girl will come around. Will he believe it? William asked. Agnes looked at him with the expression of a woman who has understood men like Fenton for 7 decades. He wants the property, she said, not the complication. If the complication becomes larger than the property is worth to him, he goes home to Socorro. She paused. The question is, how large the complication has to become. Emily set her coffee cup down. I need to appear in public, she said. Everyone looked at her. Not hiding, not managed, in town, at the general store, at Sunday service, at the places where people see each other and draw conclusions. She looked at Agnes. If Richard is telling Fenton this is temporary, then I need the town to see something that contradicts that. I need to be visible and capable and... She searched for the word. Unbothered? Agnes said. Yes, Emily said. Exactly. Agnes looked at her for a long moment. The church social is Saturday, she said. The entire valley will be there. Then I'll be there, Emily said. Richard will be there, Mercer said. I know, Emily said. So will you. Mercer looked at William. William looked at Emily. She was looking at Agnes, and Agnes was looking at her. And between the two of them, something was being established that did not need words. 2 women 50 years apart who had spent their lives holding positions in rooms that tried to move them, finding each other across a parlor table in New Mexico in the summer of 1884. Saturday, Agnes said. Saturday, Emily agreed. 2. The rest of the week moved fast. The lawyer from Santa Fe, a man named Garrett, lean and precise and entirely unimpressed by Richard Carter's name, arrived Thursday afternoon, reviewed everything Emily had in the office, and spent 2 hours writing a letter that Mercer would present to Judge Heller on Friday morning. The letter outlined the inheritance timeline, the documentation of the estate mismanagement, and the witness testimony. It did not make threats. It stated facts. Garrett was very good at stating facts in ways that made threats unnecessary. Thursday evening, Agnes Pruitt's quilting circle met as scheduled. William did not know what was said in that room. He did not need to. By Friday morning, 3 women had come to the Carter property separately to call on Emily, one with a pie, one with a basket of early vegetables from her garden, and one who came empty-handed and simply sat with Emily in the kitchen for an hour. All 3 had been at the quilting circle. Richard Carter watched this from the main house window and said nothing. He had gone to Heller on Thursday, as they had expected. Heller had received him and taken the papers Calloway had prepared, and told Richard he would review the matter and be in contact. After Garrett's letter arrived Friday morning, Heller's clerk came to Mercer's office and returned the papers. No explanation, just the papers returned. Mercer came to the Carter property with the news, and Emily received it the way she received most things, without visible reaction, sitting with it for a moment, processing it completely before she responded. "He'll find another angle," she said. "Probably," Mercer said. "But this one is closed." She nodded once. After Mercer left, she stood in the office doorway for a long time, looking out at the eastern fields at the land her father had built, and Richard Carter had been standing on, and she had been documenting for 4 years, and William stood near her, but not beside her, giving her the space to have whatever this moment was. Finally, she said without turning, "I used to stand here in the mornings and think about what this land would look like when it was mine, what it would feel like." "What did you think it would feel like?" William asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Lighter," she said. "I thought it would feel lighter." She turned to look at him. "It doesn't feel lighter yet." "No," he said. "It won't, not yet." "But it's different," she said. "It's different than it was a week ago." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "It is." Saturday came. The church social was held in the field behind the Red Valley Church, the way it always was in summer. Tables, lanterns, food, music from a fiddle and a guitar, the entire valley present the way it only was a handful of times a year. Emily arrived in the wagon with Marta and Cody at 4 in the afternoon. She was wearing a blue dress she had chosen herself, not the one she'd worn for Fenton's arrival, forced on her by Richard's instruction, but another one, darker blue, with the particular quality of clothing worn because the person inside it decided to wear it. She stepped down from the wagon, and people looked. Of course they looked. It was a small town, and she was for this week the most talked about person in it. She knew they were looking. She held her chin at the angle William had come to recognize and walked toward the tables where Agnes Pruitt was already standing. Agnes met her with the kind of handshake that is also a statement, and the 12 women of the quilting circle materialized around her with the coordinated ease of people who had discussed this beforehand. Richard Carter was there. Fenton was with him. Richard watched Emily cross the field, and his expression for the first time in William's observation of it was not controlled. There was something at the edges of it that might have been uncertainty, and might have been something it cost him more to feel. Fenton watched Emily cross the field with a different expression. He was reassessing. William came up beside Mercer at the edge of the gathering. "Fenton's reconsidering," Mercer said quietly. "I see it," William said. "If he withdraws, Richard loses the timeline," William said. "He can find another arrangement, but not in 3 months, not with this much attention on the situation." Mercer was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She's remarkable, you know." "I know," William said. "I don't mean the documentation. I mean—" Mercer paused, looking for the word. "She's been fighting this alone for 5 years, and she is standing over there looking like she owns the ground she's standing on." William looked across the field at Emily Carter, who was talking to 2 women near the food table, and smiling a real smile, the kind he had not seen on her before, open rather than managed. And he thought she does own the ground she's standing on. She always has. She just needed the space to stand there, without someone trying to take it from her. He started to look away, and then he saw Richard Carter moving. Not toward Emily. Toward Fenton. And talking fast with the body language of a man making a final argument. Fenton was listening with the cautious expression of a man who is not convinced but hasn't yet decided to leave. William crossed the field. He did not go toward Richard. He went to Fenton's other side, came up to the man with the easy approach of 2 acquaintances at a social gathering, and stopped beside him and looked out at the crowd the way men do when they are not making a point of anything. "Good evening, Fenton," he said. Fenton looked at him. Richard looked at him with an expression that had gone very still. "Dawson," Fenton said carefully. "Enjoying the evening," William said. Yes," Fenton said. He was a man who liked clarity, and this situation had stopped being clear several days ago. We were discussing. I imagine you've had a chance to get to know the valley a bit this week," William said. "Good country, good people." He kept his tone conversational, unhurried. I understand you have land interests in Socorro. That must take considerable management. It does, Fenton said. In fact, yes, it does. Lot of responsibility, William said. Fenton looked at Richard. Richard was looking at William with the expression of a man watching something he cannot stop. Yes, Fenton said slowly. A great deal of it. He cleared his throat. I had been thinking actually that this week has been that the timing of this. He straightened slightly. I have responsibilities in Socorro that require my attention sooner than anticipated. Richard went very still. Wallace, he said. We discussed. I know what we discussed, Fenton said. And something had shifted in his voice. Not anger exactly, but the particular flatness of a man who has understood a situation better than he was intended to and does not like what he understood. I'll be writing back tomorrow morning. I'll be in touch. He looked at William, then at Richard, then out at the field where Emily was standing. Good evening, gentlemen. He walked away. Richard Carter did not move. William stood beside him for a moment in the lamplight, with the fiddle going somewhere behind them. That's one less problem, William said quietly. Not to be cruel, just to say it. Richard looked at him. You think this is over? Richard said. No, William said. I don't. You should know, Richard said, and his voice had gone to something more honest than anything he had said all week, stripped of the politeness and the performance, just a man saying a true thing, that I am not going to simply accept this. Whatever you and she have built this week, I am not going to accept it. William looked at him. I know, he said, but Emily Carter is going to make it to November. Whatever you do between now and then, she is going to make it to November. He paused. That's not a threat. It's just what's going to happen. Richard Carter looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away into the crowd. William stood where he was for a moment before he crossed the field to where Emily was standing. She saw him coming. She did not stop talking to the women beside her, but she tracked him across the field with those clear dark eyes, and when he reached her, she said simply, Well? Fenton's going back to Socorro tomorrow, William said. She absorbed this. She did not celebrate it. She nodded once with the precise economy of someone who has learned not to celebrate before the ground is solid. Richard's not done, she said. No, William said. But Fenton is gone. Yes. She looked out at the field for a moment. One thing at a time, she said. One thing at a time, he agreed. She looked back at him. And then for the first time since he had walked through her uncle's gate on a wrong road with a false story about a fence, she smiled at him directly fully with nothing managed in it. It was a short moment, but it was real. And in 3 months and 15 days, when the ground was finally solid, he was going to think back to this exact moment in the lamplight and understand that this was where something had changed between them quietly, without announcement, the way the most important things always change. But that was still ahead of them. Tonight the fiddle played, and the summer evening settled around them, and Richard Carter was across the field recalculating, and there were 3 months and 15 days left to go. It was not over. But it was different. And different for now was enough. Richard Carter did not make them wait long to find out what came next. Monday morning. 3 days after the church social, Cody rode in from the direction of town with his hat pushed back and his face carrying the particular expression of someone who has heard something he doesn't know what to do with. William was at the fence line when he arrived. There's a notice posted at the land trust, Cody said. Official looking. Town seal and everything. What kind of notice? Dispute of property boundary, Cody said. Between the Dawson spread and the Carter land. Filed by Richard Carter dated this morning. He paused. It claims the east fence line is incorrect, that a quarter section of land we've been running cattle on for 2 seasons belongs to Carter. William was quiet. Does Mercer know? He asked. Mercer's the one who sent me, Cody said. William went to find Dell, told him he had the ranch for the afternoon, and rode to Mercer's office. Mercer had the notice on his desk. He had been staring at it long enough that there were coffee ring marks on the corner of it. Is the claim valid? William asked. No, Mercer said flatly. The survey was done in 1879. The boundary is established and recorded. This claim has no legal basis. He paused. But it doesn't need one. Not yet. Filing the dispute puts the land in question until a counter-survey is commissioned. A counter-survey takes 6 to 8 weeks to complete. During that time, those cattle have to come off the disputed ground. William looked at him. He's not going after Emily. He's going after the ranch. If the ranch is in dispute, your position here becomes complicated, Mercer said. A foreman of a ranch in active property litigation is a different thing than a foreman of a stable operation. Ranchers don't like their new employees tangled in legal troubles. He met William's gaze. Richard is betting that I'll terminate your contract to protect the ranch from the association. William thought about this for a moment. Will you? He asked. Mercer looked at him for a long time. No, he said. But I want to be honest with you about what this means. The counter-survey will cost money and time. If Carter escalates further, there could be additional filings. I can absorb some of that, but not indefinitely. He folded his hands on the desk. He's making the price of helping Emily Carter a price that lands on this ranch. I know, William said. And you're still here, Mercer said. Not quite a question. I'm still here, William said. Mercer nodded once slowly. Then he reached for a different piece of paper. I'll commission the counter-survey today, he said. I have a surveyor in Las Cruces who can be here in a week. He picked up his pen. In the meantime, I suggest you go tell Emily what Carter has done. Because if he's filing property disputes against you, he's doing something to her this morning too. William was out of the chair before the sentence finished. He was right. When he reached the Carter property, Emily was standing on the porch of the main house with a piece of paper in her hand and Marta beside her, and an expression on her face that was not the controlled stillness he had come to know, but something rawer. The expression of someone who has been braced for a blow and received a different blow entirely and hasn't yet adjusted to the shape of it. She held the paper out when she saw him coming through the gate. He took it. It was a letter from the territorial court, dated that morning, signed by Judge Heller. Notification of a hearing scheduled in 4 weeks to review the administration of the Carter estate on grounds of potential mismanagement. Not her. Him. Heller was not moving against Emily's competency. He was moving against the estate itself, citing irregularities in the administration, which meant citing Richard's own management of the property as administrator. William read it twice. He turned it around, Emily said. Her voice was flat. He went to Heller and somehow he turned it around. He's claiming that I have been the source of mismanagement, that my interference in the ranch records has created discrepancies that require review. She sat down on the porch step. If Heller reviews the administration of the estate and concludes that I have complicated the management, he can extend Richard's control past November. Can he do that? William asked. Garrett told me there is a mechanism, Emily said. An administrative extension, if a court finds that the beneficiary has acted against the interests of the estate during the administration period. She looked up at him. Richard has prepared documentation claiming that my record-keeping has actually obscured the true income of the eastern fields, that I have been systematically underreporting values. It took William a moment to understand the full scope of it. He had taken her strongest weapon, the ledger, and inverted it. He had taken 4 years of her meticulous record-keeping and reframed it as fraud. He was going to walk into a courtroom and tell a judge that the woman documenting his theft had been the one doing the stealing. He's been preparing this, William said. This wasn't a fast move. No, Emily said. This was always the plan. Fenton was the first option. The certification was the second option. This... She looked at the letter. This was already waiting. I just pushed him to use it faster. The words were steady. Her hands were not. She had them pressed flat against her thighs, and they were not steady, and he looked at that and felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with legal strategy. Emily, he said. She looked up. He cannot win this, William said. He might, she said. He has Heller. He has 4 years of motive to construct a counter-narrative. He has the social standing of a man this valley has known for 20 years against a young woman they have mostly ignored. She paused. And he has a month. A month to make his version of the story stick before that hearing. So do we, William said. She looked at him. Garrett is in Santa Fe, he said. He needs to be here. Today, not this week today. And the ledger needs to go with him, every page of it copied and stored somewhere Richard Carter cannot reach it. He sat down on the step beside her, which was the first time he had done that, and he looked at her directly. And you need to be seen, not just at the social, in town, at the land trust, at the bank. Everywhere the story can be told by people watching rather than by Richard Carter talking. She was quiet for a long moment. I'm tired, she said. The words were simple, and they were not a complaint. They were just true, and she said them the way she said true things plainly, without apology. She was 24 years old, and she had been doing this for 5 years, and for the last 2 weeks she had been doing it in front of an audience, and she was tired. I know, he said. I know you know, she said. I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm just... She stopped. I'm telling you because there's nobody else I can tell. And you asked me once to be honest, and I'm being honest. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, All right. She looked at him. Tell me what else, he said. Whatever else is true. She was quiet for a long time. I'm afraid, she said. Not of losing. I'm afraid of winning and then spending the rest of my life in this valley, where everyone watched and did nothing for 5 years. She looked at her hands. I'm afraid that November comes, and I get what my father meant to give me, and I don't know who I am outside of fighting for it. The morning was very still around them. I think, William said carefully, that you already know who you are. You've known the whole time. The fight just had to take up so much room that there wasn't space for anything else. She was quiet. You're going to have to take my word for it, he said. For a little while longer. She looked at him sidelong with those clear dark eyes. You're very certain of things, she said. Some things, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she stood up and smoothed her dress and held her hand out for the letter. He gave it back. I'm going to write to Garrett, she said. Will you find me a rider who can leave within the hour? Yes, he said. And then, she said, I'm going to go into town and deposit the monthly cattle income at the bank and do it in front of enough witnesses that no one can subsequently claim I did otherwise. I'll come with you, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Beside, she said. Beside, he agreed. The next 3 weeks were the hardest. Not because Richard Carter made a dramatic move. Because he didn't. He had filed his legal actions, and he let them sit, and he let the town wait, and he let the hearing approach the way a man lets a tide come in patiently, without effort, trusting the force of it. Garrett arrived from Santa Fe on Wednesday. He was in the office with Emily for 2 days, going through every page of the ledger, cross-referencing it against the counter documents Richard had submitted to the court. He was not an excitable man, but on the second afternoon, William came in and found him sitting back in his chair, with the particular expression of someone who has found exactly what he was looking for in exactly the wrong place. He made a mistake, Garrett said. Emily looked up from the page she was reviewing. In his counter documentation, Garrett said, he has submitted figures for the Eastern Field income for the year 1881. He claims Miss Carter underreported the yield by 40%. He turned the page around on the desk. The figure he uses as the true yield is sourced from a letter he wrote to a business associate in Albuquerque in June of that year, which he has submitted as evidence. And, William said, and the letter predates the harvest by 3 months, Garrett said. He wrote a letter projecting a yield before the harvest came in, and he has submitted it as evidence of the actual yield. He looked at Emily. He either miscounted the dates, or he was so certain this would never go to a real lawyer that he didn't think it mattered. Emily stared at the page. That's the whole foundation of his counterclaim, she said slowly. If that number is wrong, the counterclaim collapses. Garrett said. He has nothing to replace it with. Everything else he submitted is character assertion, willful, difficult, unmanageable, none of which is evidence of financial irregularity. He closed the folder. Miss Carter, if we walk into that hearing with this, and he has no competent response to it, the court is going to have a very difficult time sustaining his claim. The room was quiet. Emily Carter sat very still. Then she said, "Will Heller let us walk in with it?" And that was the question. Because Heller was Richard Carter's judge, and a judge who has already been paid for a conclusion does not always let the facts change the conclusion. Garrett folded his hands on the desk. "That," he said carefully, "is why I spent this morning sending a letter to the Territorial Circuit Judge in Santa Fe, requesting that given the nature of the counterclaim and the conflict of interest questions it raises regarding local judicial administration, the hearing be transferred to a neutral venue." William looked at him. "Can you do that?" "I did it," Garrett said. "Whether it works depends on how seriously the circuit takes the request." He paused. "I also sent a copy of the request to the Santa Fe newspaper's territorial correspondent, who I happen to know personally." William was quiet for a moment. "You've done this before," he said. "I have done this before," Garrett said. Emily pressed both hands flat on the desk and took one slow, controlled breath. "How long until we know?" she said. 3 to 5 days, Garrett said. "The circuit judge either transfers the hearing or he doesn't. If he doesn't, we proceed before Heller and we make the best case we can, and we trust that even a compromised judge cannot entirely ignore a counterclaim that falls apart on dates." "And if he does transfer it?" William asked. "Then we have a fair hearing," Garrett said. "And a fair hearing with this documentation is one we win." The 5 days were the longest of William's recent memory. He ran the Dawson Ranch. He managed the hands. He dealt with the counter-survey, which came back in week 2, confirming exactly what Mercer's records had always said about the east boundary, rendering Richard's property dispute void. Richard filed no response to the counter-survey. He let it go without comment, which meant the property filing had served its purpose. Distraction, delay, pressure, and he had moved to the next piece. William rode to the Carter property every morning. Not always for long. Sometimes just to be present to check with Marta, to see Emily briefly, to stand in the yard and let Richard Carter's watchers see him standing there. He did not talk to Richard again. Richard did not come to him. They were two men watching each other from a distance, waiting for the ground to settle into whatever shape it was going to take. On the 4th evening, Emily found him at the fence line on the east boundary, the same place he had found her 3 weeks ago, fixing wire in the dust alone. She came out on horseback, which was unusual. She walked to the fence most days. She dismounted and stood beside him and said nothing for a moment. He waited. "The circuit judge responded this afternoon," she said. He turned to look at her. "He's transferring the hearing," she said, "to the Territorial Court in Santa Fe. New date 6 weeks out." She paused. "Heller has been formally notified that the matter is out of his jurisdiction." William was quiet. He thought about what that meant, a hearing before a neutral judge with Garrett presenting the documentation with the date error in Richard's counterclaim, waiting to be seen by someone with no prior investment in the outcome. "Emily," he said. "I know," she said. "It's not over. 6 weeks is a long time, and Richard will be preparing a response, and there could be—" She stopped herself. "I know." "That's not what I was going to say," he said. She looked at him. "I was going to say," he said carefully, "that what you have built in 4 years, what you carried alone before I arrived, before any of this, is what made that transfer possible. The documentation, the precision, the dates and the figures and the records that were so thorough that a lawyer in Santa Fe could find a mistake in Richard's counterclaim by cross-referencing them." He held her gaze. "None of what has happened this month works without what you did in the 4 years before it." She was very still. "I need you to understand that," he said. "Not because you need me to tell you, but because I reckon you haven't said it to yourself clearly enough." She looked out at the eastern fields. "He's going to say things in that courtroom," she said quietly. "About me, about how I look, about what a woman my size has any right to expect from a life." She said it plainly without flinching. He won't be able to help himself. When the legal argument fails him, he'll use what he always uses. "And Garrett will object," William said. "And the court reporter will write it down. And the circuit judge will see a man whose legal position has collapsed, resorting to remarks about his niece's appearance in a territorial court. And that will tell the judge everything about Richard Carter that the documentation hasn't already told him." She was quiet for a moment. "You're very good at making things sound simpler than they are," she said, but there was something in her voice that was not criticism. "I'm good at finding the true thing inside the complicated thing," he said. "The true thing here is that you are going to stand in that courtroom, and every fact you need will be in Garrett's hands, and what Richard says about your body, or your face, or your worth, has nothing to do with the facts." He paused. "You know that." "I know it," she said. "Knowing it doesn't make it not hurt." "No," he said, "it doesn't." She looked at him. "Do you know," she said slowly, "that you are the first person in 5 years who has not tried to tell me it won't hurt?" He looked back at her. "Of course it hurts," he said. "It would hurt anyone. That doesn't mean it stops you." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, "William." "Yes," he said. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly and not kindly. Not the answer that makes things easier. The honest one." "All right," he said. She looked at the fence line, then back at him. "When November comes," she said, "when the hearing is done and the inheritance is settled, and I have what my father meant to leave me, and this is all resolved." She paused. "What happens to you?" He was quiet. "You came to this valley for a foreman position," she said. "You took a job. You've spent the past 3 weeks making yourself part of something that is not your fight. Not originally." She held his gaze. "And I need to know whether, when this is finished, you are a man who moves on to the next territory. Because, if you are, I need to know it now." He looked at her for a long time. The evening was going soft and gold around them, and the eastern fields she had been watching over and documenting and fighting for were right there behind her, and she was standing in front of them with the directness that was the realest thing about her, asking him the question he had been asking himself for 3 weeks. "I stopped being a man who moves on," he said. "Somewhere around the 3rd morning I rode to your fence line." She held his gaze. "That's not an answer," she said. "Yes, it is," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I need something clearer than that," she said. "I have been managed and maneuvered and told comfortable things for 5 years. I am done with comfortable things." He took a breath. "I intend to stay," he said. "In this valley. In this, whatever this is. If you'll have that. I am not going anywhere after November." He paused. "That's as clear as I can make it right now." She studied him. "That's clear enough," she said. She turned and mounted her horse. "Come for supper tomorrow," she said. "Mart has been wanting to feed you properly for 2 weeks, and I keep telling her to wait. I'm done waiting." He looked up at her. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She rode back toward the house. He stood at the fence line for a while after she was gone, with the evening settling around him and the eastern fields going quiet, and he thought 3 months and 2 days. He could wait 3 months and 2 days. Ibda. He came for supper. He came the next evening and the evening after that. And what started as supper became something else, became the table where the day's decisions were made, where Garrett's letters were read aloud and discussed, where Marta's coffee appeared without being asked, and the lamplight lasted longer than it needed to. Richard Carter made 2 more moves in those weeks. The first was that he stopped speaking to Emily entirely. Not dramatically, there was no scene, no confrontation. He simply stopped acknowledging her in the house. He ate his meals separately. He rode out in the mornings without telling her where he was going. He managed the main herd himself, or tried to, and the hands who had been quietly watching everything for 3 weeks managed him in return, doing enough to keep the property running without crossing the line into open defiance. It was Marta told William privately the most frightened she had ever seen Richard Carter look. "He doesn't know what to do when the thing he's doing isn't working," Marta said. She had the matter-of-fact tone of a woman who has observed a great deal of human behavior at close range. "He has one way of handling problems. When that way stops working, he goes quiet. He always has." "Is quiet good?" William asked. "Quiet means he's thinking," Marta said. "Thinking means he hasn't given up." The second move came in the 5th week, a letter, addressed to Emily from a law office in Albuquerque that William did not recognize. She read it at the supper table with William and Marta present, and her face went through something careful and controlled that told him it was significant before she said a word. She set the letter down. "He's offering a settlement," she said. William looked at her. "A cash sum," she said. "Considerably less than the actual value of the eastern fields and the income owed, but not nothing. In exchange for withdrawing from the Santa Fe hearing and accepting a modified inheritance schedule, the property transfers to me in 5 years, rather than November, with Richard retaining administrative control in the interim." She paused. The letter is framed as a generous offer from a concerned guardian who wants to avoid putting family business before a public court. "He's scared," William said. "He's scared," Emily agreed. "What are you going to do?" William asked. She picked up her fork. "I'm going to eat supper," she said. "And then I'm going to write to Garrett, and then I'm going to decline." She ate supper, and then she wrote to Garrett, and then she declined. Richard Carter did not respond to the refusal. He had 3 weeks left before the hearing in Santa Fe, and he was quiet. And quiet meant he was thinking, and William kept watch on the property, and kept the ranch running, and came to supper every evening, and waited. And slowly, so slowly, it was not visible until it had already happened, the thing between them that had started at a fence line with pliers and wire and a pair of work gloves, changed into something that did not have a practical name, but had a very clear feeling. It felt like I see you. Not the shape of you. Not the size of you. Not the version of you the town had decided to see. You. And in the mornings, when she stood in the office doorway looking at the eastern fields, she did not look like someone waiting for a fight anymore. She looked like someone who already knew how it ended. 3 months and 2 days, then 2 months, then 6 weeks. Then the letter from Garrett arrived 3 days before the Santa Fe hearing, and it said, "I have the evidence. I have the argument, and I have a circuit judge who has read every page of what you sent him. Come to Santa Fe. It's time." They left for Santa Fe on a Tuesday morning. Emily, William Garrett, and Mercer. Marta pressed a cloth-wrapped bundle of biscuits into Emily's hands at the kitchen door and said nothing, which was the most she had ever said. Richard Carter watched from the window of the main house as the wagon rolled out of the yard. He did not come down. He did not speak. He watched the wagon until it reached the road, and then he turned away from the window, and William, who had looked back once, did not look back again. The road to Santa Fe was 2 days. They made camp the first night beside a dry creek bed and ate the biscuits Marta had wrapped and drank coffee from the trail pot, and nobody talked about the hearing much. Garrett reviewed his notes. Mercer read. William sat beside the fire, and Emily sat across it, and at some point she said without looking up from her own papers, "Are you nervous?" "No," he said. She glanced up. "That's not true. Not the way you'd think," he said. "Not about the outcome." He looked at the fire. "Nervous about watching you walk into a room and have your life decided by strangers." She was quiet for a moment. "It's not strangers," she said. "It's the law. The law is supposed to be the same for everyone." "It's supposed to be," he said. She looked at him. "You don't believe in it," she said. "I believe in the work that makes it true," he said, "which is what you've been doing for 4 years." He met her eyes across the fire. The law doesn't protect Emily Carter. Emily Carter's ledger protects Emily Carter. The law just gives us a room to show it to people. She held his gaze for a long moment. That, she said slowly, is the most honest thing anyone has said to me about this. You asked for honest, he said. I did, she said. The fire went low between them, and Garrett's pen scratched in the quiet, and the night was full of stars, and in 36 hours, she was going to walk into a room and show a judge what 4 years of solitary, careful, determined work looked like when it finally had an audience. William watched the fire and thought, she is ready. The room just hadn't been available until now. The Territorial Courthouse in Santa Fe was a solid adobe building on the east side of the plaza, and they arrived on a Thursday morning with an hour to spare before the hearing was scheduled. Garrett went in ahead to speak with the clerk. Mercer found the attorney from Richard's Albuquerque firm waiting in the corridor, and the two of them exchanged the brief, careful nods of men who have been hired to oppose each other and are professional enough not to make it personal. Richard Carter was there. He had arrived separately the previous evening, and he was standing near the far end of the corridor with two men William did not recognize, and the Albuquerque attorney who had come back from his exchange with Mercer and was now talking quietly and fast into Richard's ear. Richard saw William. He saw Emily. He looked at Emily for a long moment with an expression that had nothing left in it that resembled the authority he had worn for 5 years. It was not defeat, not yet. But it was the expression of a man standing at the edge of something he cannot control and knowing it. Emily looked back. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, which was long enough to be deliberate and short enough to be graceful. Then she looked away and walked toward the courtroom door. William stayed 1 step to her left. Beside. Whoa. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Garrett was precise and methodical and entirely without theater, which turned out to be exactly right for a circuit judge who had spent 30 years on the bench and could identify theater from 20 yards. He presented the ledger. He presented the income records. He presented the date error in Richard's counterclaim, the letter that predated the harvest by 3 months. And he presented it without dramatics, just laid it on the table and let it sit there in the air of the courtroom like the quiet, devastating thing it was. Richard's attorney from Albuquerque was competent. He argued that the date discrepancy was a clerical error. He argued that the intent of the documentation was clear regardless of the specific dates. He argued that Richard Carter had administered the estate in good faith, and that Emily Carter's interference in the records had created the very confusion the counterclaim was designed to address. He was good. He was not good enough. The circuit judge asked Richard Carter 3 questions directly. The first, can you produce the harvest records from the eastern fields for the year 1881 that corroborate the yield figure in your counterclaim? Richard said the records have been complicated by Miss Carter's involvement in the bookkeeping. The second, can you produce any documentation of the eastern field income that is not derived from the letter to your Albuquerque associate, given that this letter predates the harvest? Richard said the documentation is contained within the overall ranch accounts, which are complex. The third, can you identify a specific act of financial mismanagement by Miss Carter, with a date and a figure that is not contested by her own records? Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the overall pattern of behavior demonstrates. The judge held up one hand. The courtroom was very quiet. I have reviewed the documentation presented by both parties, the judge said. I find that the counterclaim submitted by the estate administrator is not supported by the evidence presented. The date discrepancy in the foundational document of the counterclaim is not a clerical error, it is a factual impossibility that undermines the claim at its source. He looked at his notes. I further find that the documentation presented by the beneficiary is thorough, internally consistent, and reflects 4 years of diligent record-keeping that has, if anything, protected the value of the estate rather than compromised it. He set his notes down. The administrative extension request is denied. The November inheritance transfer stands as written in the original will. This hearing is concluded. He stood. The room moved around them. Garrett gathering papers. Mercer exhaling slowly beside William the Albuquerque attorney, leaning in to speak quietly to Richard Carter, whose face had the particular quality of a man who has just watched something fall that he had spent 20 years building. Emily did not move for a moment. She sat at the table beside Garrett with her hands folded in her lap, and she looked straight ahead at the bench where the judge had been sitting. William watched her. He saw the moment she let herself believe it. It was small. Just a breath, one breath, that was different from the ones before it, the kind of breath a person takes when they have been holding something for a very long time and have just been given permission to set it down. Then she picked up her pen and signed the acknowledgement form Garrett slid in front of her, and her handwriting was exactly as steady as it always was. She stood up. She turned. She looked at William. She did not say anything. He did not say anything. Some things do not need words, and this was one of them, and they both knew it, and that was the thing that mattered most. The ride back from Santa Fe took 2 days, same as the ride there, but it felt entirely different. Not lighter the way Emily had said she always imagined it would feel. Lighter was not quite the right word. It was more like the particular feeling after a long illness. Not the absence of pain, so much as the first morning you wake up and realize the pain is gone, and your body doesn't quite know what to do with the quiet. She sat beside William on the wagon bench for most of the second day, with Garrett and Mercer in the bed behind them, going through paperwork, and she said very little, and he let her say very little, because some things needed to be processed in the company of someone who didn't require you to talk about them. At some point in the afternoon, she said, "He looked old." William didn't ask who. He knew. "In the courtroom," she said. "Before the ruling. He looked old." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been afraid of him for 5 years. I've been building a case against him for 4 years. And when the judge said it when it was done, I looked at him, and I just thought he looks old." "What did you feel?" William asked. She considered this for a long time. "Nothing simple," she said. He nodded. "He's my father's brother," she said. "Whatever he did, whatever he is, my father loved him." She looked at the road ahead. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it," William said. "Not today." She looked at him. "That's the 3rd time you've said something like that to me," she said. "Not today. For a little while longer. You're very good at giving me time." "You've needed it," he said. "Yes," she said. "I have." She was quiet. "I don't know that I've ever had it before." The wagon rolled on through the afternoon, and the New Mexico territory spread out around them in every direction the way it always did, enormous and indifferent and entirely beautiful in its indifference. And Emily Carter sat with her hands in her lap and let herself be in it without fighting anything for the first time in 5 years. Odd. They arrived back in Red Valley on a Thursday afternoon. The news had preceded them, the way news did in small valleys. Porter had received a telegraph from the Santa Fe courthouse the morning after the ruling, and by Thursday noon, half the town knew. Agnes Pruitt knew. Cody knew. Dell had been grinning since breakfast in a way that he was doing nothing to conceal. Mercer dropped William at the Dawson ranch and took Emily home. William went to find Dell. "How's the east fence?" he asked. Dell looked at him for a long moment. "You just won a court case against the most powerful man in this valley," Dell said. "And you're asking about the east fence." "The east fence doesn't run itself," William said. Dell shook his head in the manner of a man who has decided not to argue. "East fence is fine," he said. "2 posts shifted in the rain last week. Cody fixed them." He paused. "She all right?" "She's all right," William said. Dell nodded. He looked out at the property for a moment. "You going to tell me what happens next?" he said. "I'm going to check the east fence," William said. "And then I'm going to have supper." Dell looked at him again. "Right," he said. "The east fence." He went to the Carter property that evening. Not for supper. He had not been invited for supper. The invitation was a standing one now, and had been for weeks. But this evening felt different. Felt like the kind of evening that needed its own asking rather than the assumption of habit. He knocked at the kitchen door. Marta opened it. She looked at him. Then, without a word, she stepped back and let him in. And as he came through, she put one hand briefly on his arm. Just a touch, just a second, and then went back to the stove. He found Emily in the office. She was at the desk, but she was not working. The ledger was closed. She was sitting with both hands flat on the cover of it and looking at it, and when he came in, she looked up without surprise. "I've been sitting here for an hour," she said. "Doing what?" he asked. "Trying to figure out what to do with it," she said. She looked down at the ledger. 4 years, every page. She paused. "It's done. The thing I built it for is done. And I keep sitting here, waiting to feel finished, and I don't feel finished." He sat down across from her. "What do you feel?" he asked. "Like I need a new project," she said. He looked at her. She looked back at him. Something moved in her expression. Something that had been very carefully kept back for a very long time, and was now in this small office with the evening quiet outside, and the thing that had held her captive for 5 years finally resolved, allowing itself to surface. "William," she said. "Emily," he said. "I have some things I want to say to you," she said. "And I want to say them clearly the way I say everything, because you've earned that from me, and because I don't know any other way." "All right," he said. She pressed her hands harder against the ledger for a moment, and then she looked at him directly. "6 weeks ago, I asked you what happened to you after November," she said. "And you told me you intended to stay. And I said that was clear enough, and it was, but I want to be more specific now." She held his gaze. "I want you to stay, because I want you here. Not because the situation requires it. Not because there are legal matters that benefit from your presence. Because She stopped. She started again. "Because you are the first person who has stood beside me without standing in front of me, and I did not know until you did it that I had been waiting for that my entire life." The office was very quiet. "And I know," she said, "that 6 weeks ago I would not have been able to say that. I needed the hearing to be over. I needed the ground to be solid before I could say something that was only about us, because I do not mix up what I feel and what the situation requires. I have always been careful about that." She held his gaze. "The situation is resolved, and what I feel is still there." William looked at her for a long moment. He thought about a dirt road at noon and a sound he almost didn't stop for. He thought about a woman pushing herself up from the ground with her hands flat in the dust, not looking at the road, not looking for help. He thought about a fence line and pliers and work gloves, and 2 seconds of eye contact that he had replayed in his memory every morning since. "I knew," he said from the fence line. She looked at him. "Knew what?" "That this was where I was supposed to be," he said. "Not this property, not this valley. You, beside you." He paused. "I've been in 4 territories, and I've never stayed anywhere long enough to put down a root. And I got off my horse on a road I knew exactly and walked onto private property because I heard a sound and I knew." She was very still. "You didn't say anything," she said. "The timing was not ideal," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she laughed the same short, low, almost rusty sound from the office weeks ago, but fuller this time, warmer, the laugh of someone who has been reminded that the world is sometimes absurd in ways that are not terrible. "The timing was not ideal," she repeated. "There were 1 or 2 other things happening," he said. She was still smiling when she looked back at him, and the smile did not close down. "Come here," she said. He came around the desk. She stood up, and he was right there, and she put her hand against his chest. Not a gesture of distance, but the opposite, a taking account of the way Emily did everything with attention, with intention, without apology. He put his hand over hers. "I still have a lot of work to do," she said. "The eastern fields need a full reassessment. The cattle records for the last 4 years need to be reconciled against what Richard actually paid into the general accounts. I need to establish myself as the sole administrator of this property, and there will be people in this valley who—" "Emily," he said. She stopped. "Yes," he said. "All of that. I'll be here for all of that." He looked at her steadily. "And when you've done all of that, I'll still be here." She held his gaze. "You understand," she said, "that I am not a simple proposition." "I know," he said. "I have opinions about everything, and I will not pretend otherwise to be agreeable." "I've noticed that," he said, "and I will make my own decisions about my own property and my own life, and I will not ask permission, and I will not wait for approval." "I don't want you to," he said. She looked at him for another moment. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. She did not move her hand. He did not move his. November came. It came with the particular quality of autumn in New Mexico, the days still warm, the mornings gone cold. Overnight, the light falling differently longer and more golden. The kind of light that makes ordinary things look like they have been considered carefully before being put down where they are. The formal transfer of the inheritance happened in Mercer's office on the 3rd day of November, with Garrett present by telegraph from Santa Fe, and Agnes Pruitt present in person, because she had told Mercer she intended to be there, and Mercer had not tried to argue. Emily signed her name on 4 documents. Her handwriting, as always, was steady. Mercer shook her hand when it was done. Agnes Pruitt did not shake her hand. She put both arms around Emily Carter for approximately 4 seconds, which was the most demonstrative William had ever seen Agnes Pruitt be about anything. And Emily stood in it, with her arms around the older woman, and her eyes closed, and her face doing something complicated and private, that William looked away from, because some moments belonged only to the people inside them. Richard Carter had not come to Mercer's office. He had sent his attorney instead, the one from Albuquerque, who had traveled up and signed the transfer documents without comment, and taken his copies and left. William did not know what Richard Carter was doing on the 3rd of November. He did not particularly need to know. He was watching Emily Carter sign her name to 4 documents that said, "This is yours. Your father meant it for you. It is yours now." That was enough. So, the day after the transfer, Emily rode out to the eastern fields alone. William knew she was going, and he let her go alone, because she had asked him with her eyes, and he had answered with his. Some things a person had to do by themselves, and standing on ground that had been fought for, and was now yours for the first time, was one of them. She was gone for 2 hours. When she came back, she tied her horse at the post, and walked to where William was sitting on the porch with coffee, and she sat down beside him and said nothing for a while. He waited. "It felt lighter," she said finally. He looked at her. "You were right," she said. "You said it would, and it does." She looked at her hands in her lap. "It actually does." He said nothing. She looked up. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what comes next, for the property. I want to expand the eastern herd. I want to renegotiate the cattle contracts that Richard was running at below market rates. I want to rebuild the fencing along the south boundary, which has needed it for 2 years, and I want to hire 2 more hands before spring." She paused. "And I want a foreman I can trust." He looked at her. "I have a foreman position," he said. "At the Dawson spread," she said. "Yes." "Mercer's a fair man," she said. "He is." She held his gaze. "How fair?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Fair enough to understand," he said, "that a man stays where his life is." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'll speak to Mercer," she said. "I already did," he said. She stopped. "When?" she said. "Yesterday morning," he said. "Before the transfer." She stared at him. "You were that certain," she said. "Of Mercer's understanding, yes," he said. "Of you I've been certain for a while." He held her gaze steadily. "I told you I intended to stay. I meant it. I was making arrangements accordingly." She held his gaze for a very long, very specific moment. "William Dawson," she said. "Yes," he said. "That is either the most presumptuous thing anyone has ever done for me," she said, "or the most—" She stopped. She started again. "I don't have the word." Practical, he said. She looked at him. Sure of me, she said. Yes, he said. That. She was quiet. Then she turned and looked out at the eastern fields, at the particular gold of the November light on the land that was hers now, and William sat beside her and did not say anything, because nothing needed to be said. After a while she put her hand in his. He held it. That was how Dell found them when he came up from the barn 20 minutes later, sitting on the porch side by side, looking at the land, her hand in his, and Dell took one look and turned right back around without saying a word, which was the most diplomatic thing William had ever seen Dell do. The wedding was in the spring, not elaborate. Not the kind of thing that made the Santa Fe papers, though Agnes Pruitt's account of it circulated through the Red Valley quilting circle with a thoroughness that rendered any other coverage unnecessary. Small. The church. The circuit preacher who came through in April. Mercer as witness. Agnes Pruitt in the front row with the expression of a woman who has waited a long time for something to happen correctly and is savoring the experience. Marta in the second row, with her hands folded and her face doing that contained private thing it always did when she was moved. Cody cried, which surprised everyone, including Cody. Dell did not cry, but he stood very straight, which for Dell amounted to the same thing. Emily wore a dress she had chosen herself. It was not pale yellow, or the blue from the Fenton Day, or the darker blue from the church social. It was the color of the New Mexico sky in the early morning, before the heat came, not quite blue, not quite gray, the color of the moment just before the day declares itself. She had picked it out herself 3 weeks earlier in a dry goods store in Santa Fe, where nobody knew her name or her history or what her uncle had called her or what the town had said about her body for 5 years. She had picked it out and paid for it with her own money and brought it home in a paper-wrapped package and hung it on the back of the office door. She did not ask anyone's opinion of it. She did not need to. At the reception, long tables behind the church, Agnes Pruitt's quilting circle, having organized everything, which was its own kind of marvel. William stood beside Emily, and they received the well wishes of half a valley, and he watched her move through it. Easy, unhurried answering questions about the cattle operation and the new fencing and the spring herd assessment, with the same precision she had always had, except now the precision had room around it, and in that room there was something that had not been there before, not happiness exactly. Something more durable than happiness. Agnes Pruitt found him near the end of the evening when the tables were thinning and the lanterns were burning low. "Well," she said, which was how Agnes Pruitt began most important observations. "Mrs. Pruitt," he said, "you did a thing that needed doing," she said. "Arriving when you did, staying when it would have been easier to go." She looked at him with the direct appraisal of 70 years. "I want you to understand that what you did mattered, not the legal maneuvering, not Mercer and Garrett and the counter-survey. All of that was necessary." She paused. "What mattered was that you heard something, and you stopped." He looked at her. "Someone had to," he said. "Yes," Agnes said. "Someone always does. The question is whether they do." She looked across the gathering to where Emily was standing, talking to 2 women near the food table, with her hand resting on her own property, in her own life, in a dress she had chosen herself. "She would have made it to November without you, you know." "I know," he said. "I want you to know that I know it too," Agnes said, "and that she knows it, and that it doesn't change anything about what you did. It just means—" She paused. "It means she didn't need saving. She needed company." He looked at Emily across the gathering. "I know the difference," he said. "I believe you do," Agnes said. She patted his arm once in the decisive manner of a woman concluding a point, and went to find her coat. Later, when the tables were cleared and the guests were gone and the lanterns were down, to the last few, Emily found him sitting on the porch steps of what was now their house. She sat down beside him. The spring night had the stars that New Mexico always had so full, it looked like something was showing off. "Agnes corner you," Emily said. Briefly, he said. What did she say? That you would have made it to November without me. Emily was quiet for a moment. She's right, she said. I know, he said. Does that bother you? She asked. He looked at her. No, he said. I didn't come here to be needed. I came here. He stopped. He thought about the right word and then found it. I came here to stay. There's a difference. She looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. There is. She leaned against him, which was such a simple thing, and so unlike the Emily he had met at the fence line, not because she was different, but because there was finally room for the parts of her the fight had not had space for, and he put his arm around her, and they sat with the spring night around them and the land that was hers in every direction. Tell me something, she said. What? That day on the road, she said. When you heard me, you said you almost kept riding. Almost, he said. What made you stop? She said. He thought about it. I've been in 4 territories, he said, and I've passed 100 things I told myself weren't my problem. And every time I passed them, I knew I was passing them. I knew. He paused. That day I heard you and I thought about passing it, and I thought not this one, not this sound. He paused again. I don't have a better answer than that. She was quiet. That's a good enough answer, she said. She looked at the sky. I've been thinking about what you said, she said. About the law. That the law just gives you a room. That the work is what protects you. Still true, he said. I know, she said. I've been thinking about what that means for other women, in other valleys, who have the same situation I had, and no lawyer in Santa Fe, and no Agnes Pruitt, and no company. She looked at him. I'm thinking I could do something with that, beyond the property, beyond the cattle contracts and the spring herd. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. You could. You're not going to ask me what I mean, or whether I've thought it through, or whether it's practical. No, he said. Why not? She said. Because I've watched you think things through for 6 months, he said, and you haven't made a careless decision yet. I don't need to check your work. She looked at him. William, she said. Emily, he said. I love you, she said. She said it the way she said everything directly, plainly, without preface, without softening with the full weight of meaning behind it. He looked at her. I know, he said. I've known for a while. She raised an eyebrow. That's a very confident response, she said. I'm confident about some things, he said. Are you going to say it back? She said. I love you, he said. I have since the fence line. I was waiting for the ground to be solid. She looked at him for a long moment. The ground is solid, she said. Yes, he said. It is. She settled back against him, and the spring night settled around them, and the stars did what New Mexico stars always did, made the darkness feel small, and the world feel large, and the particular life you were living feel for once exactly the right size. There was one more thing. It happened the week after the wedding on a morning in late April, when William was at the east fence line. Always the east fence line. Always his first stop. The way some habits become something else over time. And he heard a horse coming up the road from town. He recognized the horse before he recognized the rider. Richard Carter's big chestnut. But not Richard Carter riding it. A young man he had not seen before, maybe 25, with Richard Carter's jaw and a different kind of expression, the expression of someone who has made a decision and is not entirely sure of it yet. He pulled up at the fence. Mr. Dawson, he said. That's right, William said. I'm James Carter, he said. Richard Carter's son, from Denver. He held his hat in his hands. My father passed away 3 weeks ago. I came down to settle his affairs. He paused. I wanted to come by, to speak to Mrs. Dawson, if she's willing. William looked at him for a moment. What for? He asked. To apologize, James Carter said. He said it plainly, without performance, with the manner of a young man who has sorted through his father's papers and found things he wished he hadn't, and has decided to do something about it. "I've gone through the estate. I've seen the documents. I've read the correspondence." His jaw tightened. "I know what he did. To the property. To her." He paused. "I can't undo it, but I can say it was wrong." William was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Come with me." He took James Carter to the house. He told Emily before he brought him in briefly, plainly outside the kitchen door, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "All right, bring him in." She received Richard Carter's son in the parlor, the same parlor where the confrontation with Calloway had happened, where she had spoken for 11 minutes to the man who had called her difficult for 5 years. She sat across from his son, and she listened while he said what he had come to say. He said it without excuses. He did not explain his father or defend him. He said what was done was wrong, and I am sorry that it was done, and the portion of the estate in my name to dispose of, I intend to pass to a fund for women in territorial courts who cannot afford legal representation, and I thought you should know that. Emily listened to all of it. Then she said, "Your father loved this land. He was wrong about most things, but he loved this land. I think you should know that too, in case you didn't." James Carter was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know that," he said. "It doesn't excuse anything," she said. "But it's true." He left an hour later. William stood on the porch and watched him ride back toward town, and then looked at Emily, who stood beside him with her arms folded, and her expression doing the complicated thing it always did when something had touched the part of her that ran deeper than the practical. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. She paused. "It doesn't fix anything." "No," he said. "But it's something," she said. "Women in territorial courts who can't afford representation." She was quiet. "It's something." "Yes," he said. "It is." She unfolded her arms. "East fence needs a look," she said. "There's a section near the south corner I've been meaning to check." "I'll go this afternoon," he said. "I'll come with you," she said. He looked at her. "Are you coming to check the fence?" he said. "Or are you coming with me?" She held his gaze. "Both," she said. "I am coming with you, and I'm going to check the fence." He smiled, the kind that starts somewhere below the surface and arrives slowly, and she had made it happen, and she knew it, and did not pretend otherwise. "Yes, ma'am," he said. They went together, the way they always had, the way they always would, not because one of them needed the other to get there, but because together was where they chose to be, and choosing freely, choosing fully. With both eyes open and both feet on solid ground was the whole point of everything that had come before. Emily Carter had spent 5 years fighting for the right to choose her own life. She had won. And every morning after she chose it again. That was not nothing. That was not a small thing. That was in the end the only thing that had ever mattered.